that. Thank you. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome on a beautiful Tennessee morning. Have a lot of ground to cover. Committee chairs this morning, as is typical, will be a little briefer, but we will be getting a preview of items we'll see here in the next 3 weeks or so at the board meeting. And then, of course, we have personnel, finance, and audit to conduct some important business this morning as well. Just a reminder, of course, that we are being live streamed and recorded, and this will all be archived on the TBR website. As you all know, we had a tragic incident amongst our beloved TBR family. Chancellor, of course, kept us posted on the very sad occurrence in Brazil with the loss of one of our professors, Clifford Gordon of Columbia State. Mr. Gordon was an associate professor of art at Columbia State. He'd been a professor for 10 years plus. He'd had some time prior as an adjunct with us. And from everything I hear, he was also an incredibly talented artist in his own right. As you know, he was traveling with students in Brazil and lost his life again in a very tragic incident. He was loved by his students. He was one of ours, a graduate of Chattanooga State, a graduate of Tennessee State University, and then, of course, pursued his career with us at Columbia State. I understand the 3 students who were most impacted, as those were the ones with him at the time of the accident, are home. I believe everyone may be home by now as well. But as we mourn this loss for TBR, for Columbia State, for Mr. Gordon's family, would you please join me in a moment of silence to honor his memory? Thank you very much. And I know the folks at Columbia State have extended our heartfelt sympathies to Professor Gordon's family. With that, folks, regret to begin on such a somber note, but thank you again. And with that, Mariah, let's make this official and call the roll, please.
Thank you. Since this is an electronic meeting, there are 2 questions that need to be answered by regents for the record. First, can the regent simultaneously hear and speak with others participating in the meeting? And second, is the regent alone in the room? If the answer to both questions is yes, the regent can simply answer yes to both questions. Anyone who is not alone should identify any other people present in the room with the regent. When I call your name, please answer these 2 questions. Governor Lee, Regent Apple.
Mariah, I can hear and speak with you, and I'm on a headset, but I do have a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old that might be passing through the room.
Thank you. Regent Burdine.
Yes to both questions, here.
Regent Garden. Regent Gentile. Regent George.
Here and yes to both questions.
Regent Gill.
Here and yes to both questions.
Commissioner Hatcher. Regent Hooper. Regent Kastner.
Yes to both questions.
Regent Pilkington.
Here and yes to both questions.
Regent Powers.
Here and yes to both.
Madam Chair Reynolds.
Yes, ma'am. Here and yes to both.
Commissioner Reynolds. Regent Roberts.
I'm here, and I do have an 8-year-old. She's not in the room, but she might be passing through as well.
Thank you. Regent Stevenson.
Yes to both questions.
Thank you. Regent Spurgeon. Regent Barlin. And Regent White. Regent White may be joining us in just a few minutes. And just coming back, Commissioner Reynolds, just checking to see if you are on the line. You may be muted if you're attempting to speak. Okay, with that, Madam Chair, your board is assembled. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I'm sorry, I hit the wrong button. Sorry, this is Lizette. What did you say, Mariah?
Yes, thank you, Commissioner Reynolds. Just confirming that you can hear and speak with us.
Yeah, I think I said yes to both, or maybe I was on mute. I'm sorry. I'm here.
Okay, so
Yes
you
to both.
can, and you are alone in the room. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As you all well know by now, we are meeting electronically as it's an economically efficient way to discuss matters that need a timely review prior to our quarterly board meeting in June. Since this is a non-controversial and routine item, and we are covering within this hour informational items only this morning, I would propose that the necessity be adapted by unanimous consent. Of course, as always, if you would prefer that we have an individual vote on this, feel free to object, and we will take a roll call vote. But if there is no objection, the necessity to meet electronically will be adopted. Is there any objection? Hearing none, the necessity to meet electronically for this information-only meeting is adopted. Thank you very much. Chancellor, I know you may have some opening remarks for us, but I also want to mention on a happy note, our student regent, Leah Garton, who could not be with us today, however, is a proud graduate now of the TCAT Nashville, and we will celebrate her next month. As you guys may recall, she has graduated now with her diesel-powered equipment technology diploma, and we know to expect great things from Leah in the coming years, and we'll look forward to hearing from her next month. So congratulations, Leah, wherever today has taken you. Chancellor?
Yes, well, good morning, everyone. I hope that each and every one of you had a safe and restful Memorial Day weekend, a day that, as you all know, was set aside more than 150 years ago for us to honor and mourn our military servicemen and women that gave the ultimate sacrifice while serving in defense of our country, a country that we all believe in and stand for. I really want to take a moment, too, to thank all the board members that participated in commencement ceremonies. It is that wonderful time, that season, which we celebrate our graduates, just as Regent Reynolds mentioned Layla. We had graduations all across the state. Many of you were speakers at those graduations or participated and attended in commencement ceremonies. It is truly the best time of the year and especially meaningful for our students and our faculty and our staff when our regents participate. So thanks to each of you that did so this year. I also want to thank you in joining on the special called board meeting May 6th when you appointed Dr. Wendy Tosteson as the next president of Volunteer State Community College. Dr. Tosteson is already working with Dr. Deaton and several of community members and others on the campus so that she is well prepared to hit the ground running on July 1st, and we're excited about her being there. As has already been mentioned by Regent Reynolds, Layla will be rolling off soon, but we also have Regent Pilkerton who will be rolling off of our board soon. And I truly wish if I had a way to just completely immortalize Regent Roberts and Regent Pilkerton and never lose either one of them off of our board, that is what I would do. I've mentioned once before to you how much help they have been to me in talking to faculty and staff across the state, and Vanessa is truly going to be missed in this position, and just thankful that she's not leaving us as a faculty member and will continue to be a part of our system. Vice Chair Reynolds, I will turn it back over to you.
Thank you.
Any questions for Chancellor this morning? All right, so let's keep moving. We have Kim McCormick with us this morning, our Executive Vice Chancellor, of course, who's presenting both a legislative update and some workforce development updates, I believe.
Yes, well, good morning, Madam Chair, Chancellor, members of the committee. As you know, as Regent Reynolds just said, we're going to have two presentations from External Affairs this morning, the legislative update and the workforce development update. to begin with the legislative update, I have done this presentation several times, and I have said every time that I am so thankful for our government relations team with John and Patrick. And this morning, our Associate Vice Chancellor, John Williams, will be doing the legislative update. So, John?
Well, thank you, Dr. McCormick and members of the board. The 113th General Assembly adjourned sine die on Thursday, April 25th, so about a month ago. And throughout the session, the Government Relations Department tracked over 1,200 bills. So today I'll highlight a few notable pieces of legislation filed this session that will impact higher ed. So I'll dive into that first bill now. Next slide, please. So Public Chapter 925 was a caption bill and was amended to do three different things. The legislation clarifies that TBR's faculty and student regents are no longer subject to Senate confirmation. It adds a definition of quality non-degree credential to the financial aid code, and then makes some changes to how a student's GPA is calculated for the purposes of the dual enrollment grant. So if a student goes back and forth between a community college and a TCAT, it helps clarify how that GPA is calculated. And that one did pass. Next slide. Public Chapter 891 is legislation we worked on with the sponsors and appreciate their help. It's to fix an issue that has come up impacting financial aid eligibility for our LPN programs. And due to some upcoming changes in federal regulations that go into effect July 1st of this year, any post-secondary program leading to state licensure must not exceed the minimum number of hours set by a state board or statute. And if a program exceeds the state minimum, then the program no longer qualifies for federal financial aid. Our TCAT's LPN programs are 1,296 hours, and the Board of Nursing's minimum hour requirement for LPN licensure is 980. So this legislation simply aligns those two at 1,296 so that our students can maintain their financial aid moving forward, and that did pass. Next slide. Public Chapter 718 deals with the same issue, but with massage therapy. And so the legislation increases from 500 to 650 the minimum number of curriculum hours that an applicant for licensure in massage therapy must have completed. And that one did pass as well. Next slide. Public Chapter 659 allows a student enrolled at a community or technical college to taste alcohol as part of a course of instruction. The student cannot swallow the alcohol, and it must be under the supervision of an instructor. And this is one we worked on with the sponsors to help out the new AAS in distilling at Motlow State. So we're excited that one's made it through and help support that program. Senate Bill 1672, House Bill 2132, didn't quite make it across the finish line, but we appreciate the sponsors for carrying this one. It would have lowered the age of eligibility for the Tennessee Reconnect grant from 23 to 21 to try and close that gap between Promise and Reconnect eligibility. It made it out of the Senate Education Committee, but was taken off notice in House Higher Ed. Senate Bill 2327, House Bill 2179, was also carried by these sponsors for TBR, but didn't quite make it across the finish line. It would have allowed high school students to begin to access the dual enrollment grant beginning in the 9th grade if they're attending a community college. And it made it out of both of the education committees, but ultimately wasn't funded in the budget this year. So we appreciate the sponsors for carrying this one on behalf of our students. Public Chapter 581 requires TCATs to reserve an enrollment slot for dual enrollment students when they graduate high school. So if a student graduates and wants to continue on in the program that they were enrolled in through dual enrollment, it would require the TCAT to reserve a space for them in that program if space is available and they continue on directly after high school. And so that one did pass as well. Public Chapter 540 allows a student to begin using the Tennessee Promise Scholarship in the summer immediately following their high school graduation, and that one has passed. Senate Bill 1783, House Bill 2184, would have permanently extended the 4-year pilot program to award completion grants to Tennessee Promise Scholarship students. The program is currently set to sunset in the 24-25 academic year. That one was not funded in the budget, so it did not make it all the way across the finish line this year. Senate Bill 1977 was in a similar boat. It made it out of the education committees, but didn't end up getting funded in the budget. But it would have established a program to provide grants to higher education institutions to address student hunger. Next one is Public Chapter 550 requires the governing board of each public institution in the state to adopt a policy regarding the use of artificial intelligence technology by students, faculty, and staff for instructional or assignment purposes, and that one did pass. And then a few additional bills that passed this session that I'll go through quickly. The first one, Public Chapter 619, prohibits a public institution from sharing students' personal information with a third party unless that third party agrees in writing that the personal information will only be used for the purpose it was originally shared with the third party, and the information cannot be sold or shared with any other entity. Public Chapter 955 requires public institutions to establish a policy framework to promote the security of academic research conducted at the institution to mitigate the risk against the risk of foreign influence. Public Chapter 622 allows the Tennessee Higher Education Commission to designate VETS campuses that strive to increase enrollment, continuation, and graduation rates of veterans, kind of an elevated level of designation as a VETS Bravo campus, and that did pass. And Public Chapter 815 establishes a deadline for institutions to investigate a report filed by a student or employee alleging they have been penalized, discriminated against, or received adverse treatment due to their refusal to support or otherwise assent to a divisive concept. And then a couple more on the next slide. Public Chapter 868 requires each governing board of a public institution of higher ed to revise certain policies and practices with respect to accreditation, and specifies that institutions may bring a civil cause of action against an accrediting agency in certain circumstances. Public Chapter 848 creates a mechanism for the management and governance functions of the governing board of a locally governed institution to be transferred and assumed by a THEC in the event that a state university board ceases to exist. And finally, on this one, Public Chapter 610 was the Tennessee State University's Sunset Bill. Their board was extended to June 30, 2026, but it was also vacated and reconstituted. So that one did pass as well. And then on the next couple of slides, a few bills that did not end up passing, but wanted to highlight these. Senate Bill 1752, House Bill 1805, would have extended the eligibility for the Tennessee Promise Scholarship to students attending certain private for-profit cosmetology schools. Senate Bill 1937, House Bill 2178, would have created a high-value workforce readiness grant program, so for some of those short-term credentials providing financial aid, and it would have been administered by the Department of Labor to encourage individuals to pursue credentials in high-demand fields across the state. It was brought out by an organization out of Shelby County, and we worked with them, and the bill was amended to include TBR colleges as eligible institutions for the grant, but it ultimately wasn't funded in the budget this year. Senate Bill 2350, House Bill 1948, would have established various prohibitions and requirements for public institutions of higher ed regarding diversity, equity, and inclusion. Senate Bill 2351, House Bill 1660, would have required public and private institutions to define discriminatory practices in such institutions' anti-discrimination policies consistently with the definition in the Tennessee Human Rights Act. And finally, Senate Bill 2751, House Bill 2759, would have authorized the Tennessee EMS Board to authorize 5 additional EMT, AEMT training centers operated by ambulance services in the state, and that one did not pass. And then finally, on the last slide, Senate Bill 2713, House Bill 2676 was legislation that would have revised the Tennessee Higher Education Commission's statutory responsibilities The House and Senate passed differing versions of this legislation and never came together on a singular piece of legislation, so it did not end up passing this session. And with that, those are all of the pieces of legislation I wanted to highlight this morning, but happy to take questions, or if there are none, I will turn it over to Dr. McCormick.
Any questions for John? I have what I hope is a quick one on establishing a policy with regard to AI. What are the next steps for us in that? Have we had a chance to really look at that closely yet?
So I'll probably defer to Brian on the details of that, but it does give us until July 1st of 2025 to establish a policy, and the legislation encourages us to work with other higher ed institutions in establishing that policy.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board. I don't have that much data other than what John said. We've had some very preliminary discussions about how we will go about doing that. So I would anticipate no later than the June 2025 board meeting, we would have have a proposed policy for the board's consideration. There are obviously a number of moving parts in this, including, how to, the academic aspects of it and what faculty are permitted to do in connection with their classroom and teaching and how it's to be used. There's also some security aspects to it and we as members of the system office get this training with some regularity. Just some security aspects of, when we give information to an AI system, are we be careful what you give it, and because you might be letting go of some information, FERPA information, things like that. So there'll be a number of different aspects, from the security to the teaching to citations and things like that will need to be considered, but we'll be getting together a group of people to move forward with that.
Okay.
And Madam Chair, just as Brian mentioned, that is something that we are working with the other colleges within the state. We do all want to have somewhat of a uniformed aspect to this. But let me quickly just point out, we are not looking at ways to prohibit AI. We're looking for ways to utilize this resource to the best potential for all of our colleges. And THEC will be engaged with us on these conversations as well. We've had some early discussions with them. And also looking at best practices that are popping up all across the country right now. This is a very fluid product, as you all know. It's not even something that was on anyone's radar till about a year ago. So we are just trying to make sure that we don't over policy and procedure this effort, but that we make sure we are putting efforts in place that protect us, as Brian mentioned, to the best of our ability.
Oh, thanks to you all. That's very insightful. Anything else for John? If not, Kim, before I come back to you, Regent White has joined, so I need for Mariah to get him officially on the meeting, please, in the meeting.
Thank you. Regent White, we see you've joined. Would you mind confirming if you can hear and speak with us, as well as if you are alone in the room?
I can hear all alone and hear.
Thank you, sir.
You can hear me. Great. Thank you.
Sorry for the. Thank you. And Regent White, we have your consent as well for this to be an electronic meeting, correct? No objections.
Yes, you do.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. All right. With that taken care of, let me turn back to Dr. McCormick.
Thank you, Madam Chair. At this point, I would like to switch gears and move to Jeff Sisk, who's going to kick us off with the workforce development update.
Hey, good morning, all. Thank you, Dr. McCormick. Good morning, Vice Chair Reynolds, Workforce Development Committee Chair Regent George, members of the board, Chancellor Tidings. It's my pleasure to bring a workforce development report as a part of your committee chairs meeting. Next slide, please. Here's the agenda. I'm going to remind the board about the THEC reporting cycle. We have a new addition to the External Affairs Department, TCCTE. I'll let Dr. McCormick tackle that. I'm going to give you an update on an industry subsector workforce strategy regarding ceramic tile that I think you'll find pretty interesting. It kind of shows how we frame our work at the Center for Workforce Development. An update on Upskill Mid-South Grant Awards, and then a workforce convening follow-up And I'm bringing in the all-star team to help on that, Dr. McCormick and Dr. Reed. And then I will end with some questions and answers. So pending any questions on the agenda, Vice Chair Reynolds, with your permission, I'd like to begin.
Keep going. Got to stay on time this morning. So thank
Yes,
you.
ma'am. So just a reminder for the board, for our community colleges, total workforce hours are reported to THEC following a fiscal year reporting cycle. And this is the timeline for this year's reporting cycle. The 23-24 numbers are due to TBR by August 18th. By the September board meeting, we'll have really solid numbers to report back to you on workforce numbers. We did a quick survey of our colleges' projected workforce numbers for this coming cycle. 9 of our 11 community colleges are tracking for an increase over 20 of the 24 TCAS. And if you recall, last year we were up 39% in workforce hours as a system. The goal was 4% coming in. We got to 39%, but I think that really got us back close to pre-pandemic numbers. Just that quick survey, our goal coming in was a 4% increase. I think we're going to be closer to 8. So I appreciate the hard work that our offices are doing at our colleges. So next slide, please. And let me kick this over to Dr. McCormick.
Recently, the governor's office and TBR leadership discussed the Tennessee Council for Career and Technical Education, or as we call it, the Council. The Council was founded by legislation in the 1980s and primarily has had a reporting responsibility back to the General Assembly and the public. The Council has been administratively assigned to TBR for a couple of years now, but it has never had a full-time executive director. So we think the Council can do more and contribute to our mission of student success and workforce development, particularly when it comes to working with our K-12 partners. We formed a search committee, which included members of the governor's staff, and we conducted a search. With all apologies to Regent Spurgeon, we hired Vicki Bunch from the Jackson Chamber to be the executive director. Vicki has very relevant work experience that includes coordinating and planning programs that link education at all levels to business and industry. Vicki has hit the ground running. She's already met with members of the council, key leaders of the Department of Ed, CTE, and recently took a trip to Northeast State with Jeff Sis to sit in on the workforce development meeting and meet staffers. At this point, if it's okay with everyone, I would like to turn everything over to Vicki for just a moment to share the mission of the council.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Dr. McCormick. I would like to start by saying thank you publicly to Chancellor Tidings and Dr. McCormick for your confidence in me to carry out the work of the Tennessee Council for Career and Technical Education. As Dr. McCormick said, the council has been leading great work for many years, and its vision, or actually its mission, is to advocate for quality CTE programs that prepare students for success in post-secondary education and therefore their careers and their lives. The duties of the council is to analyze and report on the distribution of spending for CTE across the state, on the availability of CTE programs and services within the state, and to be an advisory board to the Board of Education for reporting to the governor. The goals of the council are to address any challenges, needs, and barriers to high-quality CTE programs and to provide input on a unified vision for college, career, and technical education. So again, I am looking forward to the work to be done. I'm looking forward to meeting you all personally and getting out across the state and hearing from everyone that is in this field. So thank you very much, Dr. McCormick. And I think now I'm turning it back to Dr. Sisk.
Hey, Vicki.
Yes.
Hey, Vicki. You didn't seek permission to enter our community. I did not even know you were in Northeast State.
You know, at one point we entered Virginia, but I don't know. Next time I will not be there without saying hello. So thank you, Miles.
Thank you. Thank you.
Can we move to the next slide?
So I'll take the hit on that, Regent Burdine. We'll give you a heads up next time. We had a great meeting in Northeast 8 with Dr. McCord and his staff. So appreciate Vicky's willingness to tag along to East Tennessee. So here's a snapshot of how we approach workforce development at a board level via an industry sector strategy. It's very interesting. And I want to give you a look at something else other than electric vehicles, just to show you that's not all that we do there. We have an incredible working relationship with the state ECD office. It's kind of cool to see Chancellor Tidings, Commissioner McWhorter, and on the Department of Labor side, Commissioner Thomas, all working together. Shrita Allen, Edward Birch at the ECD office are great to work with. Most recently, we've been engaged with them helping recruit prospective ceramic tile manufacturers and assisting another one with expansion plans as it relates to having a skilled workforce. So the ceramic tile industry is really cool in Tennessee, and it's not a very well-known story. And this slide kind of depicts the scope and impact of that industry within the state of Tennessee. So you think about ceramic tile, which I do a lot now. The basic ingredients are sand, water, ball clay, B-A-L-L, ball clay, and feldspar. And due to some really cool geography and historic times, the Gulf of Mexico coastal plain stretches all the way through northwest Tennessee and southwest Kentucky, and it has left very large deposits of ball clay. And so you see on the graphic there to the left of the Clarksville sign, that is Weakley County and Henry County. Those are ball clay mines in northwest Tennessee, one of the most key ingredients of ceramic tile. So Weakley and Henry counties. The largest feldspar producing site in the United States is in Mitchell County, North Carolina, which is almost 50 miles due south of Johnson City. So guess what's halfway between Weakley County in northwest Tennessee and Mitchell County, North Carolina? It's that 50-mile stretch of Interstate 40 that includes Crossville and Baxter, Tennessee, which is where a lot of ceramic tile manufacturers are locating. That makes sense when you think about the logistics of shipping those materials, meeting halfway, and they have access to all those customer bases in the eastern United States. A rotating group of us from TBR and State ECD have been in those ball clay quarry mines. We've been in the ceramic tile plants next to those furnaces burning at 1800 degrees and all around those autonomous robots moving that completed tile to storage. Zachary Adams from the Academic Affairs Office and I recently met in Atlanta with the Stone Peak Ceramic Tile Manufacturing Ownership Group. We have we have a terrific understanding of the workforce needs. But if you think about the logistics there of the ceramic tile industry, so those heavy equipment operators that mine the clay up in Henry and Weakley County, those CDL dump truck drivers that move the clay and the sand to those plants over in East Tennessee, the production technicians that operate that machinery inside the ceramic tile plants, the multi-craft skilled maintenance techs that keep the equipment in those furnaces operating at peak capacity, the CDL drivers that deliver the completed tile to wholesalers and retailers all over the country, to the ceramic tile setters and installers putting the tile in homes and businesses in Tennessee. That is the workforce industry subsector strategy for ceramic tile. So our work there is going to benefit not just the ceramic tile. You think about the CDL truck drivers that we need in Northwest Tennessee. They're not the only industry that's going to benefit for that. You think about the road builders and construction companies and things. So it will benefit other sectors, but that's just kind of a snapshot of how we're approaching workforce development at a system level. Now, on the ground, those individual community colleges and technical colleges meet those specific needs for those particular industry and those service delivery areas. So we're doing a lot of work in the ceramic tile space, focused on Department of Labor stats on available labor in each of those regions, working with the National Tile Contractors Association, the Ceramic Tile Education Foundation. So doing a lot of work in ceramic tile, but in particular Northwest Tennessee along that corridor into the Upper Cumberland regions to support the ceramic tile industry. So I just want to kind of give you a snapshot of that. It's an incredibly interesting industry that we're working with there. Next slide, please. Thank you. Upskill Mid-South is an organization in Memphis that awards federal EDA grants funding received by the Memphis region. They're sitting on about $21.5 million. I'm on the board of Upskill Mid-South. They're the organization that makes the awards. The administrative entity is the University of Memphis. And interestingly enough, Regent George's CIO at IMC is chair of that board, Joel Tracy. And so they just did their first round of funding awards. It covers all of West Tennessee, North Mississippi, Eastern Arkansas. Our colleges submit applications for funding and proposals for workforce training programs and other services that are in that covered region. TCAT Northwest received $245,000 to support 2 specific training programs for workforce development in their region, EVPT, electric vehicle production tech, at their Covington campus, and then building construction technology at the main campus in New Bern. So hats off to Dr. Jones and her team at TCAT Northwest for their work in Upskill Mid-South. Round 2 of funding considerations are coming up. Everybody submits things in that region, so we're looking forward to seeing how the funding in round 2 falls out. So let me hand this off to Dr. McCord, and for the next slide, please. I'm sorry, Dr. McCormick.
Thank you.
Called Dr. McCord off guard there. Sorry about that.
He's probably here too. All right. So on April 22nd, as you all know, TBR, in partnership with ECD and the Department of Labor, hosted a workforce convening at Ball State. We had over 250 attendees, including Governor Lee, ECD Commissioner McWhorter, Department of Labor Commissioner Denise Thomas, all of our college presidents, and there were also some state elected officials. We have a few pictures of that day that we want to share. Keep going, Carol. Yeah, let's move quickly over that one. There's Chancellor. And this is Commissioner Thomas. And this is our wonderful Regent Reynolds welcoming Governor Lee. You know what? Go back to that one for just a second. Dr. Reed and I were talking about that picture yesterday. Regent Reynolds, that is just the best picture. I don't know what it is about it, but it's great. The mutual respect there of the two of you, it's wonderful. And you've got a security presence behind you as well.
That's my personal security.
There you go.
Just kidding.
Carol. And Governor Lee was absolutely in his element that day. He, speaking to the business and industry leaders and to all the TBR college leaders. And I think someone said that he was so impressed that every single one of our college presidents were actually in that room. Okay, we can keep going, Carol. As I said, we had over 250 people attending that event. There were employers in the room that represented business and industry in these 6 important sectors in Tennessee's economy. And as you can see here, there was great representation in these sectors of business and industry leaders. And we need to acknowledge and thank Ball State Community College, the team, for hosting the event. The data and policy team led by Dr. Deaton for their work in formulating the questions and developing the industry profiles for the represented industry sectors. Our team at TBR for handling the logistics, promoting, staging the event, and of course the college presidents and the selected administration at TBR for facilitating and recording the charrette proceedings at the tables of industry. Speaking of that, the key element of the convening was the charrette process that we went through. One of the stars of the show was Vice Chancellor Jothany Reed. She was the one who designed the charrette process, trained the facilitators and recorders, and coordinated the immediate reporting out that occurred at the end of the event. So let me turn it over at this point to Dr. Reed so she can discuss the charrette process and to share her perspective on the event.
Great. Thank you, Dr. McCormick. And good morning, Madam Vice Chair, Chancellor Tidings, and members of the board. Just wanted to give a high-level snapshot of that event. from the charrette perspective, if you didn't get to participate, a charrette is simply a facilitated and collaborative planning process that allows you to integrate different perspectives into a planning process, and worked really well for us to get input from our 250 guests that were there. It was structured around those 6 different industries. And again, all of our community college and TCAT presidents and vice presidents were all trained as facilitators as well as recorders. And we also had system level leaders who functioned in those roles as well to support these collaborative discussions. And I think it's great because we are all in education to understand the history of charrette. It just comes from the French word for little cart. And in Paris in the 19th century, professors would literally circulate little carts for students to put their final projects on, and students would jump on those carts to put their final touches on their architecture projects. And so charrette is just kind of jumping in there, adding your thoughts and ideas and your final touches into what becomes kind of a major project with everyone's voice and ideas in it. Next slide. What was important again around that convening, as you look at just all of the engagement there, is all of that led to 3 outcomes for TBR. One, we really wanted to listen and learn from our partners' expertise on how we could better prepare our students around workforce and economic mobility. We wanted to use this as an opportunity to strengthen our communication and collaboration from the system office and the colleges with our partners. And again, always to ensure workforce readiness so that we heard about any emerging durable skills or technical skills that we needed to integrate into our technical curriculum. Next slide, please. We also wanted to highlight there was great energy from our industry partners, and we got so much wonderful feedback. I wanted to highlight a quote that one of our participants sent us. Jason Stanley, he's the senior manager for manufacturing workforce development at Nissan, shared the following quote. He said, "I truly enjoyed this event and the activities it included. The opportunity to listen to the speakers and engage in meaningful table discussions was both informative and enjoyable. Hearing diverse perspectives from various industries and educational professionals offered valuable insights, which I'm confident will drive positive change. I'm personally looking forward to the next Tennessee system convening and the chance to continue these important discussions." And again, we can see images here of our presidents leading these great conversations with our industry partners. Next slide, please. And again, we had wonderful keynote speakers, which we highlighted, from the chancellor to our commissioners from ECD and Department of Labor. And not only did people participate as keynote speakers, we see here Commissioner McWhorter also participating in the charrette, which was great to see. Next slide. And again, it wasn't discussion for discussion's sake. Those recorders captured all of the feedback that happened at those table discussions. And we now have a committee that is working through all of that data and identifying high-level themes and any actionable strategies that we're putting together in a report now that the system as well as the college can use to guide next steps. At this point, I turn it back to Dr. McCormick. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Reed. It was a wonderful event, and thank you for all you did to put it together. And we will be, as you said, yes.
This is Regent Gill. I had a question. Could Dr. Reed explain the charrette again for just a minute? Just a quick summary of it.
Yes, sure. So with the charrette, it is a facilitated, structured process. So at every table, we had a trained facilitator that was typically a president. The facilitator had a list of questions to guide that facilitated instruction questions. We had a recorder that would capture everything that the industry partners answered so that we could capture that data to come out with some actionable strategies. We spent about 70 minutes through that guided, facilitated conversation, and in the room we had the table structured by industry so that we could hear from all the advanced manufactured people together, all of the healthcare folks together. And so every table had a trained facilitator recorder. We had questions. All of the guests got industry profiles so that the guests knew what TBR colleges had done in terms of programs in an industry, our enrollment, our graduation rates, so that they had some data to react to. and talk about, but more than anything, it was a chance for industry partners to tell us what they needed more of, what we were doing really well, and what was coming in their field so that we had something to react to continue to do the great work that TBR does. And again, what will happen now, since we captured everything that they said, our committee is putting together a report with kind of those high level themes that will become actionable strategies that we can use to strengthen our programs and our relationship with those industry partners. So again, that charrette is kind of a planning process where you get all of this input at once, but it is timed, it is facilitated, and it is about having a very organized process for getting input from diverse stakeholders.
That's very impressive. I'm sorry I missed it. It sounds like a really special time. What is the origin again, the French origin?
It's just the French word for little cart. And in 19th century, architecture professors would make students put their last project in the cart, and the students would jump on it and finish their final touches. And so it just expanded into how do you get people to add their thoughts and ideas to a final concept or idea. And so it became a charrette. Actually, in the world now, businesses use charrettes more than education. So I like to share that history because educators are now starting to use charrettes much more than the business industry.
You know, maybe in the future we could get a little cart made and let and let Chair Reynolds ride on it as it goes around the room.
I'm about to put you on a big cart.
It was very, very impressive, Dr. Reed. I'm sorry I missed that. I really am.
It was a
Thank
great
you, Regent
day.
Gill.
And Regent Gill, we're going to be presenting the results of this convening at the September board meeting. Well, if there are no other questions, Madam Chair, that concludes our external affairs report.
I thank you very much. And I think for the September meeting, we may need to be prepared to explain the origin of the word charrette once again. So we may hear that one more time to Regent Gill's good questions. Oh, no, that was really, in all seriousness, Mark and others, I'm sorry you had to miss it because the governor was truly impressed at the folks in the room, at the tone and tenor, at the industries represented. So our team really did an exceptional job, which I know is no great surprise. So I hope Vice Chancellor Reed hasn't gone far, thanks to Dr. McCormick and the team. But we're going to bring Vice Chancellor Reed back up for more progress within our system and being responsive to exciting new technologies and needs in the state. And that's a presentation on a proposal for a nuclear technology program at Roane State. And I think I saw President Whaley here as well.
Yes, thank you. It is my pleasure to now present to the committee a new associate program to the state, the first of its kind, which is Roane State College's proposed Associate Applied Sciences in Nuclear Technology. Next slide, please. After I share highlights of the new program, I will be joined by Vice Chancellor Alicia Fox, who will present the budget, the enrollment, and graduation enrollment and numbers. And then we will also hear from President Chris Whaley, who will share the impact of this for his community, as well as industry partners. And then the three of us together will take questions at the very end of our presentation. President Whaley is also joined by experts from his team, Vice President Dr. Diane Ward, and the new program director, Joe Steinbeck, who will join us at the very end. First, I want to share about the academic program, the unique features of this program. This new program, the Associate of Applied Science and Nuclear Technology, it will meet the industry-specific needs and unique academic and career goals of students within the college's 8-county service region. The college currently offers well-established and developed auto-related programs under its AAS in industrial technology. The proposed 63 credit hour nuclear technology program is designed to meet workforce needs within the Oak Ridge and surrounding areas for technical level education in the fields of nuclear science and radiation detection and measurements. The 63 credit program includes 26 hours of general education, 33 hours of major field corps, and 4 hours of electives. Although this program will be located within the Oak Ridge area and housed at the Oak Ridge campus, it is intended to serve The 8-county service area providing access to a variety of nuclear technician and nuclear worker placements and job opportunities following graduation. The program parallels and is modeled by a successful chemical engineering technology program already underway at Rome State. It is unique compared to other nuclear technology programs. It encompasses the entire fuel cycle versus specific disciplines such as you see in the Chattanooga State Commercial Reactor Operators Program. It is also a broad range of regional industries and nuclear operations, including commercial, research, defense, and cleanup. It provides simultaneously in-class and hands-on laboratory experience. And what is unique is that Rome State was approached by an independent advisory board to develop this 2-year Associates of Applied Science in Nuclear Technology. This advisory board is currently in effect and is predominantly made up of major industries in the nuclear field surrounding the Oak Ridge, Tennessee area. The industries serve Rome State's efforts for the program in both an advisory capacity and as a collaborative partner by providing subject matter expertise in curriculum development. The industries are Oak Ridge National Laboratory, ORNL, the Y-12 National Security Complex, the University of Tennessee Knoxville, United Clean Up Oak Ridge, Omega Technical Services, Triso X, MS Technologies, Energy Solutions, RBM Services, and GEM Technologies. The program will be the first AAS in nuclear technology in the TBR system and adds 4 courses to the existing course catalog that is specific to nuclear industry. The proximity of Rome State campus to the nuclear industry in Oak Ridge allows the college to work closely with its industry partners in this area and will also position the college strategically for future growth in the industry in areas such as small molecular reactors and nuclear fuel decommissioning and decontamination. The increasing demand for alternative clean energy solutions, such as nuclear, and the need for new technology designs has increased the demand for this nuclear program. This also supports new and up-and-coming sources of clean energy and fusion. Both ORNL and Y-12 DOE funding for research and operations both have a positive outlook for the next 5 to 10 years. Also, according to Nuclear Energy Institute, this increased demand is expected to remain high for years to come. In terms of workforce demand, this program will allow students to meet industry-specific needs, allow students to be marketable by developing multiple skill areas. Students will work with industry partners in direct relationships, and all of these organizations have committed to internships and apprenticeships where available. From 2023 BLS data, the median wage for nuclear technicians in Tennessee is $90,000, with job vacancies impacted by retirements and replacements. In terms of future hires, BLS data has indicated that nuclear technicians are a high demand field in Tennessee, with the majority of these being in the East Tennessee region. With the developing nature of nuclear fuel technologies and with increasing emphasis in the area by both the governor and the state legislation, this need for well-qualified technicians will continue. The institution has also secured letters of support from industry partners to further support the regional need for this proposed program. The anticipated implementation date of this program is fall 2024. Next slide, please. This program also aligns with the Drive to 55 and Tennessee workforce development goals to provide a well-trained workforce. The program also aligns with the THEC State Master Plan for Higher Education by addressing the 3 areas of student success, family prosperity, and workforce. It supports the TBR goal of providing a workforce prepared to meet industry needs, and the Rome State goal of providing innovative programs to develop a talented workforce. The proposed program will provide students with high quality and relevant career-focused credentials. As dual enrollment will be a component of the proposed program, students of the region will have a clear pathway from high school through higher education and into the workforce. While this AAS program is focused on meeting workforce needs, the college is working directly with UTK on curriculum development. And UTK provides valuable input through its participation in the Program Advisory Committee, so there will be future opportunities for an articulation agreement. There will be no impact on faculty or on this resources, as only 4 new courses are being created to develop this new degree. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to Vice Chancellor Alicia Fox, and she will be followed by President Whaley, and at that time, we will take questions. Vice Chancellor Fox, next slide, please.
Thank you, Dr. Reed. Good morning, Vice Chair Reynolds, Chancellor, members of the board. So I'm presenting today the revenue and cost projections for this new AAS and nuclear tech program for Rome State. As you can see on the screen, we have it broken down by year 1, 2, and 3 estimated cost, with our cost at the top. We have one-time cost on the top row, and then recurring costs beneath that. And then below, you can see the tuition and fees estimates and total revenue estimates. So at the top, the one-time in year 1, one-time funding, $183,600 is for startup equipment. As you can imagine, they are taking a space that they were currently using for a program that is no longer being offered, and they are renovating that into the lab for this program. So not a ton of renovation needed. It was already a working lab, so just a few modifications to get in the specific equipment needed for this program. So you can see those costs there in year 1, the bulk of the one-time cost coming in the first year startup, and then some additional equipment cost coming in year 2 and 3. Under recurring, under faculty, they are planning to hire 1 full-time teaching director, so a program director that will also teach in the program, as well as 1 adjunct faculty member. They have the $1,500 in travel, and then the $4,500 in other is what you would see normally in a program this size for just instructional and consumable supplies needed to run the program on an annual basis. Following that, you'll see the tuition and fees. Year 1, they're anticipating 15 full-time enrollment in that program. They do have some grant funding and then other industry partner donations that are noted there below, around $612,000 total in grants or other funding. They were the recipient of the State of Tennessee Governor's Nuclear Energy Fund Award of $462,000. So that is a bulk of their donation and grant funding that they've received there. But again, plenty of revenue generated in year 1 to be successful straight out the gate. And then, as you will, in year 2 and 3, they anticipate enrollment growing steadily in this program. For their enrollment comps, they have used their chemical engineering tech program that they started several years ago at Rome State, which is a comparable program using a lot of the same general studies classes, and then a lot of the same curriculum classes, with the exception of 3 specific core courses for this program, which will differ from the chemical tech program, but still a good comparison for enrollment. They currently have 50 to 60 students annually enrolling in that program with a 90% grad rate. So they think that these estimates are very conservative. They anticipate seeing a lot higher numbers, but we do think that these are good, accurate projections for enrollment and then graduates, as you can see in the screen there as well. Also thinking those are conservative. You can see they expect 5 graduates in year 2, moving up to 10 in year 3. But currently in that CET program that I mentioned that they started, that's comparable, they had 5, 18, and 19 graduates as soon as they started the program in year 2 and 3. So again, this has been reviewed by the committee. We've asked questions, gone back and forth. We think this is a good estimate of enrollment as well as an accurate budget for this program, and we're happy to recommend it today to you.
Next slide, please. At this time, we've asked President Whaley to provide and highlight from the president perspective about the value of this program to his community. And right after President Whaley, we will open up for questions. And again, we will invite his team to also join us to answer those questions. President Whaley?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Reed. Good morning. Thank you, Vice Chancellor Fox. Good morning, Madam Chair Reynolds, Chancellor, members of the board. It's a pleasure to be with you for a couple of brief moments this morning. I certainly don't have to tell any of you about the critical work in nuclear energy going on in the Oak Ridge region. Certainly, least of all, do I have to tell Regent Stevenson about this work with entities like the Y-12 National Security Complex, the uranium processing facility, already in place at Oak Ridge. The need for workforce in this area already exists. And for some time, the leaders in these areas, the two entities already mentioned, Department of Energy, certainly Oak Ridge National Laboratory, United Cleanup Oak Ridge, et cetera, have talked to us about the need for this program because, as with many programs, we already have a great pipeline of employees in the engineering world. UT Knoxville has one of the premier nuclear engineering programs in all the country. Tennessee Tech is starting up a nuclear engineering program. But the need, the critical need is and will be for the technician level employees. And that is the place where we are hoping to step in and supply that workforce. The need for technicians in these areas exists. It's only going to grow over time. All of you know that TVA and other power suppliers are shifting away from coal. And while hydro and solar and wind will all have their place, it's really nuclear that's going to have take the biggest share of that shift away from coal. So as we look at all the things going on in the Oak Ridge region, just a few, the small modular reactor that was mentioned on the Clinch River site, the development of a molten salt reactor, all the nuclear fuels companies that have located and are looking to locate in the Oak Ridge area, the future of things like fusion. Oak Ridge is really seeking to become, some would say, the Silicon Valley of nuclear fuels and nuclear energy. And they're going to need a workforce in order to be able to get to that place. And that's where we believe the nuclear technicians step in. And so, as Dr. Reed mentioned, I have several of my colleagues from Roane State, including very blessed to have our program director, Dr. Joe Steinbeck, who is, don't have enough time to tell you all that he is and means to this region regarding nuclear energy. Very blessed to have him in the Roane State team, and the work that he has done with these entities, both DOE and private, who really have created this curriculum. This is the way it's supposed to work, for business and industry to tell us this is what we need, and then what we do is create a curriculum around that with their help, with their strong support and involvement through our advisory board, as well as has been mentioned, the funding. This is an equipment intensive program, you might imagine. So we're very pleased to not only receive the state funding that was mentioned, but also a Department of Labor grant funding that will help us get along the way on this. So there are just not enough strong words for me to try to describe what this program will mean for the future of this work in the Oak Ridge region. And I want to thank specifically Dr. Reed and her team for helping work to get this proposal to this point. And we'll be glad to stand for any questions.
And let me share another piece with the board before we go to questions. Part of my team's review, I have a pretty diverse team committee that goes through the program review process. We also have a site visit, a virtual site visit with Roane State. And as part of that site visit, we asked them to bring in their industry partners. They
education requirements, and those education requirements are only a 2-year associate's degree. And so we're going to be very focused on radiation measurement so we can produce students who can meet the RCT needs. And that's not only just Oak Ridge area, but also across the nuclear weapons complex. And then you're going to need those from the commercial reactor perspective. In addition to that, what I've been doing is visiting all of my industry partners and sitting down with them and in some cases taking a tour of their facilities. Energy Solutions, just visit them a couple of weeks ago. This is another example. They are short about 5 to 6 technicians in that field. These technicians go around doing radiological surveys of waste that we send out west. And do the paperwork, do the engineering associated by what kind of packaging and getting that product shipped out to the waste organizations. When I went over to Oronell, in addition to Oronell, there are a lot of technicians that support the scientists in putting the research apparatuses together for supporting research. And so Y12, an example would be working down with the uranium and working with the operations in their chemical 9212 area. So retiring from Y12, it'd be a direct application in the technician level at Y12. And that's why I'm very focused on, like Dr. Whaley said, with the equipment that's going to go in the lab, such as glove boxes, uranium processing, simulated uranium processing apparatuses, measurement equipment. So there's a whole list of technician level, anywhere from engineering technicians to RCTs to those technicians that work in the waste area. So there's a high demand across the spectrum here.
I think I saw Regent Kastner's hand up too. And then Barry has a comment as well, or perhaps a question. Regent Kastner, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you. A couple comments and a question. I cannot be more positive and excited about this. I can't think of anything more cutting edge for TBR than this exact kind of program. I'm in 100% agreement that nuclear is the answer for clean energy. You actually mentioned fusion, which blows my mind and makes me very excited, because if you really think fossil fuels came from decayed organic matter, you're saying that all energy on Earth came from the sun, and the only way you get independent is you create a sun on Earth, and that's fusion. So you guys are spot on. I think we do have a typo on our revenue slide, and where we at the year 3, it says our revenue is 14,000, or our net, I guess, is 14,006. I think we left a 3 out of there. Out of our revenue, but I'm assuming we'll find a way to be cash flow positive, because we're kind of not in these projections, but it's not bad. But again, I couldn't be more excited about this. Thank you.
Regent Stevenson? Speaking of someone else who might be excited about this, given where he sits.
Yeah. Well, given the fact that I'm one of the employers who competes for those positions that this program is going to help create. So, the thing that Dr. Steinbach and I think Dr. Whaley are aware of, perhaps didn't say, but there is tremendous competition for those of us in the commercial world competing with those in the government world for trained individuals. So we see a bright future for the people coming out of that program, whether they go on to an advanced degree or progress within one of our commercial operations or government operations. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Well, this is very exciting. Any closing comments, Dr. Reed?
No, just I appreciate the board's receptivity to this. I want to thank President Whaley and his team for their innovation in doing this work. A lot of great work from the team. I want to recognize Vice President Diane Ward for her leadership and working with Dr. Joe Steinbeck and all of the people who made this happen. So just really want to recognize the work that happens at the college, because really they're the heart of everything that we do at TBR, and our team is just glad to support their work and anything we can do to do that forward. Also, thank you, Regent, for recognizing there's a typo. We will update that slide so that what goes in the record is updated and accurate. Thank you.
Leave it to the CFO, that eagle eye. So, oh, no, to everybody, thank you. I mean, clearly there's great interest from the board. And since we've had this very productive conversation this morning, this program, at least at the moment, appears it will be on our consent agenda for the June board meeting. But you will have a chance to eye those materials one more time in your board books. So, but keep going. I think you can tell the words you use, Dr. Reed, there is great receptivity from the board to this program. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. You guys, apologies. We are running behind, but this has been an important conversation. One of our last business items for this session before we move to the Personnel Committee is from our General Counsel, Brian Lapps, for, I guess this is really more a preview, right, Brian, on Title IX regs?
Yes, it is. And good morning again. And I will try to make up a little bit of time here by just giving you a general overview of the Title IX regulations. Next slide, please. And what we're going to need to do to go ahead and implement them. Just as generally speaking, here's where we are right now on effectiveness and timing. The final regulations, or the final rule, they're used interchangeably, become effective on August 1, 2024. And this is the final rule that really deals with how we investigate and handle complaints of sex discrimination, including sexual harassment, including sexual assault, and those types of things. So it's, I assume everybody has some level of familiarity with it, because it is certainly a political issue that has been getting a whole lot of play. The other rule regarding Title IX is an athletics participation rule, and it's been put on hold, according to the Washington Post, until after the election. What it really deals with is transgender student participation in sports at all levels, from the grade school level to the middle school to the high school to the intercollegiate levels of things. So we don't expect anything on that before the election. We'll see what happens after the election. The state of Tennessee, led by General Skrmetti, has filed a lawsuit challenging portions of the federal regulations and seeking an injunction. The two major arguments in that lawsuit are that essentially the redefinition of sex to include things like sexual orientation, gender characteristics, is beyond the scope of the authority and is inconsistent with current law. And then second of all, there's an argument that the final rules expand the definition of sexual harassment inappropriately. I'm certainly overgeneralizing and painting with a very broad brush there, but a hearing for the injunction is scheduled on June 10. I would anticipate the court would take it under advisement and think about it for a while and not just rule from the bench. But it is possible that the regulations could be enjoined and prevented from going into effect in their entirety or partially. There is litigation by other states in other forums that could also affect the regulation. So we are certainly monitoring what is going on, and we are nevertheless getting ready to prepare so that if they go into effect, we are ready to comply. If they are partially in effect, we're ready to comply with the portions that are in effect. Next slide, please. The major themes in the new regulations versus the existing regulations is that the old regulations, or I should say the current regulations, largely follow what the law is established by the United States Supreme Court. The newer regulations have broader goals. They go beyond what the Supreme Court says and take the position that because this is regulatory enforcement guidance, we're not necessarily bound by what the Supreme Court says the law is. We can do certain things over and above that in terms of enforcement. if you still want to file a lawsuit, you've got to file in order to win it. You've got to do what the Supreme Court says. But from a Department of Education enforcement standpoint, we can go beyond what the Supreme Court says, and they do that in some of the major ways. They go ahead and try to prevent and remedy sex discrimination is that they have broader jurisdiction than the current rules. The current rules largely apply to behavior that happens in our education programs and activities, more directly in the education and programs and activities. Again, I'm painting with a broad brush and oversimplifying, but that essentially means on campus or in conjunction with an off-campus sponsored activity like a sports trip or a study abroad program or something like that. The newer ones say that even things that happen off campus or outside of your jurisdiction can have spillover effects into your campus jurisdiction. For example, if there is an off-campus alleged rape and the two people are students, it could have effects on the educational environment and what's going on campus. There's also a broader scope of covered conduct by these regulations that's going to cause some major changes in how we approach things in our policy. The current regulations, the sexual misconduct regulations under Title IX, apply only to student-involved sexual misconduct, specifically a sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, and stalking, those types of things. These regulations, though, will apply to all sex discrimination in our programs and activities, including employee sexual harassment, employee involving a student involving an employee, or two students. So it's going to be a much broader scope than of covered conduct that we have, which is going to cause an increased amount of work by our Title IX coordinators, including increased training of employees. So a bottom line is that the new regulations will increase the workload for our colleges. Next slide, please. So some of the responsibilities for the Title IX coordinator will just be making sure that the sex discrimination is prevented and remedied in all of our programs and activities. And like I said, more training, more oversight. They're going to get more complaints to handle and more complaints to process and administer and adjudicate, hence the greater workload. Next slide, please. From a training standpoint, we're going to have to increase employee training to, promptly upon hiring, every year, and whenever there's a position change that alters their obligations with respect to Title IX. Different levels of employees have different responsibilities with respect to Title IX. One of the key points of the training will be to know what you're supposed to report, when you're supposed to report it, and who you're supposed to report it to, including with respect to when you're learning of pregnancy. So those employees who have special adjudicatory roles or heavily involved in sexual misconduct and sexual harassment, sex discrimination processes will need additional training. And it's more than make available training, so there's going to need to be more training. One thing about the current regulations is that all training has to be posted on the website. Under the current regulations, with the new regulations. We will probably just create one comprehensive sex discrimination and sexual harassment policy and eliminate 3 policies that used to differentiate, or that currently rather differentiate between the different types of sex discrimination. So maybe in some respects, it will be easier to get for people to get where they need to go if they want to look at sex discrimination issues or complain about sex discrimination issues. The current process for our current discrimination and complaint and investigation procedure, we will in all likelihood just cut sex discrimination out of that. So it would be all kinds of discrimination and retaliation except for sex discrimination, because that will go up into the general sex discrimination policy. So we'll probably need minor revisions on the student conduct policy, on disciplining types of things. We'll need to make minor revisions to the pregnancy, childbirth, and related medical conditions policy that it applies to employees that y'all passed last June, I believe it was. And then we'll need a new policy regarding pregnancy, childbirth, and related conditions for students. The final thing we'll need to do is to, in all likelihood, implement an emergency rule. For those of you who have been around a little while, you have been through a rulemaking procedure. That was a full rulemaking procedure. We will have to go through a rulemaking procedure to change our Title IX rule, to change our student conduct rules. But in the meantime, because we cannot go through a full rulemaking procedure by August 1, we will probably, mid to late July, be asking for a special board meeting in order to make policy revisions to comply, as well as to implement an emergency rule. We're in current consultation with the Attorney General's office about certain aspects of the rule as well as the policy. We're not going to probably have any definitive word from the Attorney General's office in time to address these issues in the June board meeting. And as I said before, there is litigation pending that is not, we're probably not going to have any decisions in time for the June board meeting, especially since the most important piece of litigation has the preliminary injunction hearing starting on June 10th. Next slide, please. That's just what I went through. Sorry, I didn't ask for the slide there. So, and that will just conclude it. And I'll just pause here and see, Madam Chair, whether there are any questions.
Questions for Brian at this juncture? All right. I think you covered this very well for what we know at this point in time. Thank you as always.
Thank you.
Chancellor, anything you'd like for us to know as we close this section with regard to the June quarterly meeting, or anything else that's on your mind?
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. We are looking forward to visiting Jackson State Community College on Thursday, June 13th, for our upcoming quarterly board meeting. A draft of the agenda was included in your materials for today's meeting. The meeting will begin at 1 o'clock and will be a one-day meeting. Mariah Perry will send additional details about the meeting soon, but if you have any questions, as always, don't hesitate to reach out to Mariah. On Friday morning, June 14th, we will host a private tour and lunch for our board members at the new TCAT Jackson at Stanton. The ribbon cutting ceremony at Stanton will be held in the afternoon, and Mariah will send additional details about the day's events to you all very soon. We can't wait to cut the ribbon on this new TCAT campus and celebrate its grand opening. Thank you, Madam Chair.
That is very exciting indeed. Thank you. Anything from anybody else? All right. Well, with that, if there is no further business, we will adjourn our committee chairs meeting, and I will hand the proverbial gavel, so to speak, to Chairman Powers to call the Personnel Committee into order.
Thank you, Chair Lady. I've got a little bit of a sore throat this morning. I was singing too much at a worship thing, So forgive me, but I'll just try to keep rolling. I know we're on a tight schedule. So again, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm calling the Committee on Personnel and Compensation of the Tennessee Board of Regents to order. Madam Secretary, please take the roll.
Thank you. Since this is an electronic meeting, there are 2 questions that need to be answered by regents for the record. First, can the regent simultaneously hear and speak with others participating in the meeting? And second, is the regent alone in the room? If the answer to both questions is yes, the regent can simply answer yes to both questions. Anyone who is not alone should identify any other people present in the room with the regent. When I call your name, please answer these 2 questions. I'll first start with our Personnel and Compensation Committee members, and then since this is an electronic meeting, we'll check to see if any other regents are remaining on the line. Regent Burdine.
Here and yes to both questions.
Regent Hooper. Chairlady Powers.
Here and yes to both.
Regent Stevenson.
Here and yes to both questions.
Regent Varlin. And Regent White.
Sorry, here and yes to both.
Thank you. Madam Chair, you have a quorum, and again, I'll check for other regents who may be remaining on the line. Governor Lee, Regent Apple.
I'm here, and I still have 2 grandchildren with me.
Thank you. Regent Garten, Regent Gentile, Regent George, Regent Gill,
Here and yes to both questions.
Commissioner Hatcher, Regent Kastner,
Yes to both questions.
Regent Pilkington,
Here and yes to both questions.
Madam Chair Reynolds,
Here and yes to both.
Commissioner Reynolds, Regent Roberts,
Here, and I'm currently alone right now, but I may have an 8-year-old passing through to get some chips.
thank you, and Regent Spurgeon. Thank you, Madam Chair. Your committee is assembled and you do have a quorum of committee members. Thank you.
Maria, I
Excellent.
don't believe you called my name.
She did.
Oh, Regent George, I apologize. I see that you're here. Can you confirm you can hear and speak with us and that you're alone?
Yes to both questions.
Thank you, sir.
Excellent. Thank you, Mariah. This meeting is being held electronically as it is the most economically efficient way, and the matters to be considered require timely action and review by the Personnel and Compensation Committee. So given that necessity to meet electronically is a non-controversial and routine item, I propose that the necessity be adopted by unanimous consent. Anyone who wants to have the individual votes on the necessity to meet electronically should feel free to object, in which case we will have a roll call vote. If there is no objection, the necessity to meet electronically is adopted. Is there any objection? Hearing no objection, the necessity is adopted, and we'll proceed with the first agenda item, which is policy revisions. Members, the 4 policy revision items and materials were provided on our website, and I'd like to call on Vice Chancellor Alicia Fox to provide a brief overview of the proposed revisions.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Today, I'm presenting 4 minor personnel policy revisions for your consideration. These revisions have been provided in advance as described in the transmittal. Next slide, please. First, we have policy 5.01.01.11, days of administrative closing. The revision is to provide clarity only on which employees are eligible and does not change the intent of this longstanding policy. In summary, the word regular was added in front of part-time in all sections that it appears. The policy already had the word regular in front of full-time, but not part-time. Next, we have policy 5.01.01.08, parental leave. This revision is to provide clarification that paid leave is to provide bonding time with the newborn or newly adopted child. Policy 5.01.01.06, leave transfer between the state universities and the college system of Tennessee and state and local education agencies. This revision is to provide the definition of teacher as described pursuant to TCA 8-34-101 within the policy itself so that readers are not required to look up the definition separately. And finally, policy 5.01.01.00, employee disciplinary action. This revision is to provide clarity with respect to gross misconduct. Section 2B adds language related to gross misconduct and accrued unused annual leave payout. These 4 personnel policy revisions have been reviewed and recommended by the Human Resources Officers Group, the Business Affairs Subcouncil, and the President's Council. Chair Powers, this completes my comments, and I'm happy to answer additional questions if needed.
Excellent. Are there any questions for Vice Chancellor Fox? Going once, twice, and 3. Moving along. Unless there's any objection, we will act on the 4 policy items with 1 roll call vote, and this includes revisions to TBR policy 5.01.01.11, days of administrative closing, TBR policy 5.01.01.08, parental leave, and TBR policy 5.01.01.06, leave transfer between the state universities and the college system of Tennessee and state and local education agencies. And the last, TBR policy 5.01.00.02, employee disciplinary. Is there any objection to acting on all 4 policies with 1 vote?
No.
If not, then I'm going to go ahead and call for a motion.
So
moved.
So I heard
I'll second.
Tom White and Miles Burdine second. Thank you, Regents, for that. Any discussion? Okay, hearing none, we will have a roll call vote since we are conducting the meeting electronically. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Regent Burdine.
Aye.
Chair Lady Powers.
Aye.
Regent Stevenson.
Aye.
And Regent White.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you, Mariah. And the next item on our agenda is the President Emeriti contracts. So I'm going to call on our General Counsel, Brian Laps, for the recommended proposals, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is an annual exercise that because for a limited number of presidents who are going to be identified on the next slide, but per the requirements of Tennessee state law and one of our policies, people who serve as President Emeriti must report for the previous year's work and that gets approved by the sitting president and have a contract and a work plan for the coming year for the next for approval by the board. So attached in your materials are the reports from the previous year from those who were serving as presidents emeriti, as well as the contract recommendations for the coming fiscal year 2024-2025 for their approval. Next slide, please. And we have now 6 people who are still eligible, with President Boyer being the last person who is eligible because things have changed since then. But those 6 individuals listed on your screen, along with their service dates, are seeking renewal of their presidential emeriti contracts for the coming year. Next slide. I'm sorry, previous slide. With that, I'll ask if there are any questions, and Chairman, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, General Counsel Laps. And I'll call for a motion to approve the contracts as presented.
I'll move for approval.
Thank you, Regent Burdine. And do I have a second?
Second.
Somebody said that, but I didn't catch who.
I think we both did. It's Tom White.
Thank you so much, Regent White. And is there any discussion? Hearing none, we will have a roll call vote, please. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Regent Burdine.
Aye.
Chair Lady Powers.
Aye.
Regent Stevenson.
Aye.
And Regent White.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you, Mariah. And moving on to the next item, item 3 is the faculty emeriti. And I will call on Vice Chancellor Jothany Reed for the recommended proposals, please.
Thank you, Regent Powers. Good to see everyone again. It's my pleasure to present faculty emeriti nominations. TBR Policy 5.02.01 governs the submission, review, and approval process. For faculty emeriti, college presidents nominate these candidates based on distinguished institutional service. Presidents may confer with other staff on campus, but the nomination really is at the sole discretion of the president. Although there are no specific criteria, selection is historically based on length of service, significant contribution, outstanding academic achievement, and exceptional embodiment of institutional values. Non-monetary benefits for faculty emeriti can be afforded at the discretion of the president. Examples may include office space, library privileges, free admission to arts athletic events, or ID card with an honorary title. Nominations are reviewed by TBR's Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs and require Chancellor and Board approval due to the prestige of the title and the continuing status of representing the college and the system. We have 8 faculty nominations for the Board's consideration, and their information has been provided in your materials. I do want to take a moment to highlight it. Faculty take tremendous pride in being recognized by the board for their years of service. But very briefly, Patsy Wirtz, Associate Professor at Rome State; Susan Wood, Associate Professor at Cleveland State; Wanda Grimes, Associate Professor at Vol State; Kathy Garner at Jackson State; Pete O'Brien, Associate Professor at Jackson State; Gary Broomer, Professor at Jackson State; Melinda Wade, Associate Professor at Southwest Tennessee; and Loretta McBride, Professor at Southwest Tennessee. These are our candidates for your review today. Madam Chair, this is a summary of the recommendations for faculty emeriti, which have been reviewed by the staff and recommended for action by the board.
Thank you, Vice Chancellor. Are there any questions for Dr. Reed?
I move for approval.
Thank you so much. Who was that, please?
Miles.
Miles, thank you so much. And is there a second?
I'll second. It's Tom.
Thank you, Regent White. And is there any discussion? Hearing none, we'll go ahead and have a roll call vote. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Regent Burdine.
Aye.
Chair Lady Powers.
Aye.
Regent Stevenson.
Aye.
And Regent White.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. And we are going to go on to our 4th item on the agenda, which is system-wide compensation strategies. And for that, I will call on Vice Chancellor Alicia Fox once again for the recommended proposal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So today I am presenting the FY 24-25 system-wide compensation strategies for your consideration. These strategies have been provided in advance as described in the transmittal. As background, the governor's state budget proposal includes that a salary pool should be created and identifies a percent amount that this pool should be. For fiscal year 24-25, the pool amount is 3%. State appropriations fund a portion of this pool, generally around 2/3, and our colleges fund the rest through other revenue sources. As we move forward, you can think of these strategies as some guardrails around salary pool use. Components of these compensation strategies include 2 parts, the first being system-wide salary adjustments from the 3% pool, and the second being additional institutionally or locally funded increases. We will first review the recommended system-wide 3% salary pool adjustments. TBR staff is recommending that at least 2% be issued as an across-the-board increase to all unrestricted regular full-time and part-time benefit eligible employees effective July 1. The remaining 1% may be distributed also effective July 1 as either an additional across-the-board adjustment, payment on the college's board-approved comp plan, faculty promotions, or some combination thereof. Once the compensation strategies are approved by the Personnel and Comp Committee today, the colleges will be required to submit their individual strategies to the system office staff for presentation at the June meeting for board review and approval individually. The second part of the strategy for your consideration today are the additional institutional or locally funded recurring increases in one-time payments. Locally funded signifies that a college will be using their own unrestricted available revenue to fund these proposed increases. The recurring request would follow one of the methods above for determining the adjustments, such as across the board, comp plan payment, or faculty promotion, but would be submitted to TBR staff in the October budget revision and will be presented for your approval at the December board meeting. Non-recurring one-time payments may also be requested at this time, up to a maximum of $1,500, and would follow the same timeline, being submitted to TBR staff as part of the October budget revision. But per policy, the chancellor has the authority to approve one-time payments, and any, if approved, would be reported to the board at the December meeting as an interim action item. Chair Powers, this completes my presentation and recommendation of these strategies for approval. I'm happy to answer additional questions if needed.
Thank you, Vice Chancellor Fox. Are there any questions for her? Hearing none, we'll move on to a motion. Is there a motion?
So moved. It's Tom.
Thank you, Regent White. And a second, please, Miles.
I'll second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Hearing none, we will move on to a roll call vote. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Regent Burdine.
Aye.
Chair Lady Powers.
Aye.
Regent Stevenson.
Aye.
And Regent White.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you, Mariah. The next item on the agenda is institutional requests for new and amended compensation plans. Vice Chancellor Fox, once again, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In accordance with TBR guideline P-043, compensation, the following proposed compensation plan methodology have been submitted for review and were included in your materials. The submissions include the following institutions: Chattanooga State, Cleveland State, Dyersburg State, Roane State, Southwest Tennessee, Volunteer State, and Walter State Community College. In summary, Dyersburg State Community College is proposing a revision to their existing compensation plan to change the degree attainment increase from a flat amount to a percent amount of the employee's salary. Chattanooga, Cleveland, Roane, Southwest, Volunteer, and Walters are proposing new compensation plans to address changes in the market. The new or revised compensation plans were reviewed within the system office by a committee of 5 individuals from the following offices: Finance, Academic Affairs, Policy and Strategy, and 2 individuals from Human Resources. The committee reviewed the proposed plans for methodology, market data being used, consistency, completeness, equity, and clarity. After reviewing the proposed plans, the committee respectfully recommends board approval of these proposed revisions of the compensation plans. And I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Vice Chancellor Fox. Are there any questions?
I'll move for approval.
That was Miles. Thank you.
Your turn, Tom.
And second, please.
Second.
Thank you, gentlemen, for doing this on a repeated basis.
I'll sit this one out.
Is there any discussion?
Are you calling for a second?
Oh, did you say you were going to sit it out, Tom? Were you messing with me?
I was messing with you.
Okay.
Apologies.
Barry, thank you. I think he had it covered. He was just giving me a hard time because it was due. Any discussion? Hearing none, Madam Secretary, roll call vote, please, ma'am.
Regent Burdine.
Aye.
Chair Lady Powers.
Aye.
Regent Stevenson.
Aye.
And Regent White.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. And that gets us to the next and final item on the agenda, the one y'all were looking for, executive incentive payments. And once again, drum roll please for Vice Chancellor Fox.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. I'm trying to make up some of this time for you guys. So my final agenda item are the executive incentive payments. The Executive Performance Incentive Plan was approved at the June 2013 board meeting. It was created at the request of board members to address the gap between the average market salaries for presidents, directors, and the chancellor, and the current compensation level of these officials. The plan provides an opportunity for leaders to earn up to 10% of the market value of their respective position on an annual basis, based on institutional and individual performance. 85% of the 10% is metric based, and 15% of the 10% is discretionary based. The incentive payment does not add to the base salary for this position and is recalculated each year based on an established performance metric. Participants in the plan include the presidents of the community colleges and the Tennessee Colleges of Applied Technology, as well as the chancellor. A separate attachment with individual amounts was included in advance with your materials. Chair Powers, this completes my presentation and recommendation of executive incentive payments. I'm happy to answer additional questions if needed.
Thank you so much, and thank you for speaking so fast. I could barely keep up. Any questions for her? Hearing none, I will call for motion, please.
So moved. It's Tom.
I'm going to give this one to Barry. Thanks, Tom. And a second.
I get the second then. It's Tom.
All right. Thank you guys so much. The enthusiasm level is just very specific to only the Personnel and Compensation Committee, I think. And any discussion? Hearing none, we will have a roll call vote. One more time, please, Madam Secretary.
Regent Burdine.
Aye.
Chair Lady Powers.
Aye.
Regent Stevenson.
Aye.
And Regent White.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Look at us. Well, is there any other further business to come before the committee? Hearing none, the Committee on Personnel and Compensation for the Tennessee Board of Regents stands adjourned. Chair Lady, you have it back.
I thank you, Regent Powers. Well done. Now, let's see, as you put it, if we can continue that enthusiasm as Regent White brings to order the Finance Committee.
Great. We will maintain that good momentum. And I'm calling the Committee on Finance and Business Operations to order. And Secretary Perry, I'll ask you to call the roll, please.
Thank you. Since this is an electronic meeting, there are two questions that need to be answered by regents for the record. First, can the regent simultaneously hear and speak with others participating in the meeting? And second, is the regent alone in the room? If the answer to both questions is yes, the regent can simply answer yes to both questions. Anyone who is not alone should identify any other people present in the room with the regent. When I call your name, please answer these two questions. I will start with our Finance and Business Operations Committee members, and then we'll check for other regents who may be remaining on the line. Regent George.
Yes to both questions.
Regent Gill.
Yes to both questions.
Regent Kastner.
Sorry, I was muted. Yes to both questions.
Thank you. And Chairman White.
Here and yes to both.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, you have a quorum, and I will now check for other regents who may have joined or who are remaining on the line. Governor Lee, Regent Apple, Regent Burdine,
Yes to both questions.
Regent Garten, Regent Gentile, Commissioner Hatcher, Regent Hooper, Regent Pilkington,
Here and yes to both questions.
Regent Powers,
Here and yes to both.
Madam Chair Emily Reynolds,
Here and yes to both.
Commissioner Reynolds, Regent Roberts,
Here and yes to both.
Regent Stevenson,
Yes to both questions.
Regent Spurgeon, and Regent Garland. Thank you, Mr. Chair. We are good to proceed.
Great. Thank you. As with our other meetings, this meeting is being held electronically, as it is the most economically efficient way, and the matters to be considered require timely action and review by the Finance and Business Operations Committee. Given that the necessity to meet electronically is a non-controversial and routine item, I propose that the necessity be adopted by unanimous consent. Anyone who wants to have individual votes on the necessity to meet electronically should feel free to object, in which case we will have a roll call vote. If there is no objection, the necessity to meet electronically is adopted. Is there any objection? Hearing no objection, the necessity is adopted. Appreciate that. We will now proceed with the first agenda item, which is the review and consideration of tuition, mandatory fees, and non-mandatory fees for academic year 2024 to 2025. And I'll ask Vice Chancellor Fox to summarize the staff's recommendation. Alicia?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Long summarization coming up, but I am going to try to summarize. Although we do have a short agenda with only 2 items, we do have a large amount of material to cover on the first topic, which is, as noted, the FY25 tuition and fee recommendations. All of the slides and supplementary documents were included in your meeting materials in advance of today's meeting. In the interest of time, I do not intend to read you every data point on the following slides, but I will highlight key points or components as we move through the presentation. And also, Mr. Chairman, if it's okay with you, I may stop at the end of each section to ask for questions. Because if I wait till the end, people might forget their question by the time we get there. So I'll take it in sections if you're agreeable to that.
That sounds great. Thanks.
To begin, I want to quickly review the general financial environment. I'm sorry, next slide, please. That drove the tuition and fee recommendations before you today. Our community colleges saw an increase in enrollment in fall 23, with FTE enrollment up 3.6% from fall 22. This is encouraging news following several years of declines during the pandemic. Remaining conservative, the majority of the community colleges are projecting flat enrollment for budget purposes for FY25. TCAT enrollment remained consistent with record dual enrollment increases. One additional point of clarification is that the outcomes-based performance funding is calculated on 3-year average data. So we will continue to see the impact of those enrollment declines playing through the formula funding for FY25 and further into FY26. Although not as robust as previous years, higher education received continuous state support as the total sector received $57.2 million in state appropriations for the upcoming year for outcomes formula and partial funding of the statewide salary increase. The TBR system specifically received $16 million in recurring operating, including partial funding for a 3% salary pool. Next slide, please. To provide some historical data, slide 4 includes a chart comparing tuition increases from FY15 to FY24, as well as the cumulative percent and dollar amount increase over that same period. The annual average percent change at community colleges was 2.49% and 2.1% at TCATs. I will note that the inflation percent change during that same period was 3.04% annually. As you can see on this slide, in FY15, the percent average increase for community colleges was 5.5%. I call attention to this specifically because although in FY15, the increase was 5.5%, in other years it was much lower to bring that average annual change below the 2.5% I mentioned earlier and below the inflationary annual change. To me, this slide demonstrates the commitment of this board to keep higher education affordable for our communities while using data to guide financial decisions and knowing how to adjust appropriately to handle changing situations in the economy. Next slide, please. At their May 16th commission meeting, THEC voted to set a binding tuition range of 0 to 5.5%. This was an expansion of the previously set guiding range. You may recall that in November 23, the Commission approved a 0 to 4% guiding tuition and fee range for FY25. in partnership with $17.2 million to fund the outcomes-based funding formula and $41 million to partially fund a 3% salary increase at our institutions of higher ed. So what prompted this change? Several higher ed administrators advocated the commission to consider expanding the range to 1, reflect what the THEC model indicated for the range in November, and 2, provide flexibility to address the impact of new overtime rules, which I will discuss in more detail later, and to recognize new compensation studies and updated salary ranges for higher education jobs. In November, when the guiding range was set, the THEC tuition model suggested a range of 0 to 6% was needed to address inflation and salary gaps at that time. Next slide, please. Now that we have discussed the background information, we will first discuss the mandatory fee requests submitted by our community colleges and recommended for approval by TBR staff. As a reminder, any mandatory fee approvals are factored into our overall binding fee range number. We add tuition and mandatory fees together, and therefore changes in either impact the total percent change. Since we calculate tuition increases by hourly rates first, the board could approve the staff recommended tuition increase as well as the 5 mandatory fee change requests presented today and remain in compliance with the THEC binding range. You have 4 mandatory fee increases and 1 mandatory fee elimination in your materials, and I will discuss them briefly on the next slide. Next slide, please. The first 2 requests are both from Nashville State to increase a current student activity fee as well as the student government fee. Staff support the 2 mandatory fee increases as they were brought forward by students at the college in 2021 through a process that involves student body participation and would support student activities or events as recommended and approved by students. Based on reviewing and comparing the data, the student body determined that a $5 student activity fee and a $4 student government fee would be appropriate. The student body voted and approved these fees. However, due to the way THEC calculates the fee increase for compliance with their binding tuition range, we had to request these fee increases incrementally. This request will reach the $5 and $4 amounts originally proposed. Next slide, please. As part of the Business Affairs Subcouncil Task Force recommendation, originally presented in March, this group is bringing forward the request to standardize the program service fee for all community colleges at $20 a semester, with the exception of Chattanooga State, whose increase would be $3. Chattanooga historically combined multiple mandatory fees into a single amount, and thus they are an outlier here. But when you combine all the mandatory fees from the other 12 community colleges, their total is consistent with the average. In addition, the task force recommended eliminating the mandatory sustainable campus fee being charged at 2 of our colleges, Ball State and Pellissippi, and to further the standardization project. And I think that concludes my comments on the mandatory fees. So while we were on this slide, I'll be happy to take any questions on those.
Hi, this is Regent Gill. You mentioned that that the fee increase was approved by the students, and what's the process of the students approving that?
So it varies at individual schools, but essentially most of the time it's a student survey driven by their student government organization or their student activity committee that would send a survey out to the entire student body to ask whether they support a fee increase or a fee being added.
So on I guess slide 9 maybe is what I'm looking at. The under student exposure, it says a student survey was emailed to 7,090 students from November 20th, December. Students responding to the survey equaled 419. Students supporting the fee increase equaled 231. So are we saying here that out of the 7,000 students that were sent the survey, 231 were the ones who voted it in?
Yes, I think it was saying 400 responded and 230 supported it.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Great question. right. Okay. Then I will move on to our non-mandatory fees. So next we will review the non-mandatory fee requests for the TCATs recommended for approval by TBR staff. These fees do not factor into the binding fee range as they are tied specifically to a course and they are not charged to every student. So you may recall at the March board meeting, the board approved a recommendation from the Business Affairs Subcouncil Task Force to fold the TCATs into the same non-mandatory fee request process as we historically followed for the community colleges. Going forward, the community colleges and TCAT fees will all be brought forward at the same time, but given the timing of the new process approval in March, these are being considered out of cycle for FY25 at this board meeting. These recommendations include the approval of 7 miscellaneous non-mandatory course fees. Next slide, please. This slide provided in your materials details the courses for which the fee would apply, as well as how the TCATs determine the amount of the fee. The TCAT President's Group and program curriculum chairs work together to discuss these requests and make requests as a group on behalf of all TCATs offering the noted programs. In addition, following the standardization work with the Community College Task Force, they propose standardized fees. The general need described for these fees is to cover a portion of the rising cost of consumable supplies needed to operate these programs. Annual program operating budgets were reviewed by the colleges and used to analyze the cost of consumables utilized in the programs. My own research noted that nitrogen costs are up 4% in 2024, oxygen costs are up 16.81%, and steel prices remain high and have yet to stabilize from the pandemic increases. On average, the requested fees would cover approximately 1/3 of the cost of the supplies used annually in these programs. TBR staff has reviewed these requests and find the request to be reasonable and in line with other TCAT and community college miscellaneous course fees in place currently. I'll be happy to answer any questions about the non-mandatory miscellaneous course fee request for our TCATs. Going once. All right, moving on. Next slide, please. Now we will move into the tuition recommendation for annual year 24-25. Next slide, please. First, I will give you a little background on the framework around how we calculate these recommendations. As this slide notes, the 3-step process involves identifying the difference between salary pool appropriation provided and the actual cost, inflationary impacts on cost of goods and services, and any other specific institutional needs to determine the total revenue or funding need. Step 2, we translate the total funding need to the level of increase needed in student revenue percent. And then finally, in step 3, we translate the student revenue percent into the dollar amount change in hourly maintenance fee or tuition rates. Next slide, please. As described on the previous slide, step 1 in our process involves the estimated calculation of the cost of the salary pool versus the amount of state appropriation received toward the salary pool. This chart is showing that calculation by individual community college and includes the average difference among the 13. You can see in the bottom far right corner that 1.8% of the 3% pool required for our community colleges was unfunded through appropriations, meaning that our colleges would need to fund that amount through other revenue sources. Next slide, please. Slide 14 is showing the same calculation, but for our TCATs. You can see here at the bottom of the screen that 1.4% of the 3% pool required was unfunded through appropriations for our TCATs and would require other revenue sources. Next slide. As included in your materials, slide 15 speaks to the new overtime rules I mentioned earlier in this presentation. For background, the Fair Labor Standards Act, or FLSA, was enacted in 1938, establishing minimum wage, overtime pay eligibility, record keeping, and child labor standards affecting full-time and part-time workers in the private and public, federal, state, and local government sectors. Last month, the U.S. Department of Labor introduced a final rule that will increase the standard salary level for exempt positions. The current salary threshold is $35,569. The new rule requires the threshold increase to $43,888 effective July 1, 2024. And then another threshold increase to $58,656 on January 1st of 2025. So what does this mean for our colleges in this discussion? Over the past several months, our campus HR personnel have been running reports to determine how many employees at their college fall into this category. And then campus administrators have been developing plans on how to address this new rule. Although it is not likely that every school would increase the salary for all the impacted positions, the total maximum exposure for all of higher education in Tennessee was self-reported to cost approximately $28 million and impact 3,255 employees, with TBR colleges specifically at $2.5 million and 251 employees. This data is relevant to this conversation as it serves as further background and one consideration for the tuition recommendation you have in front of you today. Next slide, please. So continuing with step one, the calculation process includes the estimate of expense increases or fixed costs due to inflation. As background, the system office calculates inflation using the average of HEPI and CPI. For purposes of this discussion, HEPI, or the Higher Education Price Index, is an inflation index designed specifically for use by institutions of higher education. Compiled from data reported by government agencies and industry sources, HEPI measures the average relative level in the price of a fixed market of basket of goods and services purchased by colleges and universities each year through current E&G or education in general expenditures, excluding research. Many find this to be a more accurate indicator of cost changes for colleges and universities as compared to the Consumer Price Index or the CPI. The CPI is a measure of the average change over time in the prices paid by urban consumers for a market basket of consumer goods and services. As you can see on this slide, at the time of calculation, the HEPI rate was 3.96% and the CPI was 3.15 for an average of 3.56%. Historically, TBR staff has calculated the share of inflation to replace at 80%. In an effort to encourage colleges to identify efficiencies and cost savings opportunities as part of their budgeting process. Next slide, please. Slide 18 and 19 show a summary of the step one calculations and the indicated student revenue increase in both percent and dollars, first for the community colleges and then for the TCATs in aggregate. Next slide, please. This slide explains that to remain revenue neutral for annual year 24-25, as compared to the current year, community colleges would need 1.84% increase to cover their portion of the state salary pool, 2.12% to cover 80% of the inflationary increases, and 1.24% for program initiatives, which would include adjustments needed related to the overtime rule we just discussed or other potential competitive salary range adjustments. This shows a total need of 5.2%. To cover the maximum exposure related to the overtime law changes discussed prior, our colleges would actually need closer to the top of the binding range at 5.5%. But knowing that not all of our colleges will move all positions to the new range, we believe 5.2% covers where we will realistically calculate where our schools may land. Next slide, please. As noted previously, slide 19 shows the same calculation, but for our TCATs, with numbers very similar to that of the community colleges. As you can see, 1.32% for the salary increase, 2.56% for 80% inflation, and then 1.32% for program initiatives. Next slide, please. Slide 20 and 21 show the same information, a summary of step one and step two calculations in dollars, but are shown by individual community college on the current slide and TCATs on the next slide. Again, I will go through these very quickly. They're just going to pop up on the screen because they were provided in your materials, but happy to answer any questions. As you can see, this includes the breakdown by individual TCAT. Next slide, please. This brings us to the recommended tuition rates for annual year 24-25. Next slide. The following slides show the credit hour and trimester rate change in dollars for community colleges and TCATs respectively. The current slide shows you the dollar amount change at community colleges for all tuition types. Thank you. As you can see here, a 5.2% tuition increase results in approximately $9 increase per credit hour at the community college for in-state and mandatory fees. I will also note that we are recommending a freeze on out-of-state tuition and the E-rate for annual year 25. Next slide, please. This slide shows the dollar amount trimester rate change for the TCATs, which is $67 per trimester. Next slide, please. And slide 25 shows the dollar amount change as well as the percent change broken down by individual school for the community colleges. The average annual increase at the community colleges would be $241. You will note that the combined totals differ slightly among the community colleges due to any mandatory fees previously approved and already being assessed. You will also note that the increase for TCAS annually is $201, as noted on the bottom of this chart. This concludes the review of the maintenance fees, out-of-state tuition, mandatory and non-mandatory fee request. We recognize and appreciate the administration and General Assembly's strong commitment to higher education. Their past commitments to funding higher education have helped to put us in a position to weather the enrollment declines and inflationary increases over the past couple of years. But our calculations show our colleges have additional needs, most heavily driven by the remaining high inflationary numbers, as well as competitive compensation challenges and new overtime labor threshold changes. If there are any specific questions that I can address, I'm happy to do that related to the materials that went out or anything presented today. Otherwise, Mr. Chairman, staff formally recommends approval of increases in tuition for annual year 24-25, as shown on slides 23-24, approval of mandatory fees on slides 7 through 8, and approval of non-mandatory fees on slide 10. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So I have a question, Alicia. Why
Yes.
no out-of-state increase?
So no out-of-state increase because we have been in the process at the system office of reviewing our out-of-state tuition rate and then comparing that to the locally governed institutions as well as our neighboring states related to out-of-state tuition. We are on the higher end. So we're currently in the process of evaluating what that looks like and getting some data to present to the board related to out-of-state tuition. So at this time, we thought the best move would be to make a recommendation just to hold steady and not increase further while we can do further research on how our out-of-state rate is comparing to others around us.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I really would like to just take a moment and commend Alicia and her staff for the great job that they have done on this budget, but also to thank them for the work that they're doing and trying to get us to a standardization of fees across the system. That's been an issue that we've been dealing with for quite some time, and I feel like with the work that they're doing at this point that we've made significant headway in trying to get that to happen. So again, thank you so much to Alicia and the entire team that worked on this.
I would agree with that. A lot of looks like you took a deep dive on that. 5.2% seems to be very reasonable to me. And it seems pretty standard between the community colleges and the technical schools.
Yes, thank you for that.
You're on mute, Tom.
I'm sorry, the dog started barking, so I had to mute there. Any other questions for Alicia before we call for a motion? All right, then is there a motion to approve the consideration of the tuition mandatory fee and non-mandatory fee rates for academic year 2024-2025?
Yes, I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Mark. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Great, thank you, Mark. Any further discussion? If not, this does call for a roll call vote. So Secretary Perry, I'll ask you to call the roll.
Regent George.
Aye.
Regent,
Yes.
thank you. Regent Gill.
Aye.
Regent Kastner. I believe he was stepping away for a moment.
No, I'm here.
Oh, you're
Aye.
back. Thank you, sir. And Chairman White.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Great, thank you. So we got one other item. So the second agenda item is the review and consideration of the capital budget recommendations for the 25-26 fiscal year. And I'll call on Executive Director Dick Tracy to review the capital budget recommendations.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay.
This year, we're recommending 4 projects. I guess the first slide. We're going to be recommending 4 projects for capital outlay. Last year, THEC allows us or requests that asks that we submit our 3 top priority projects. Last year, we submitted 3 projects. There was no capital outlay funding for higher education. I think University of Tennessee had 1 project. So this year we're submitting the same 3 projects, and I'll touch on those briefly, and we've added 1 project. The first project is the TCAT Nashville project we submitted last year. This is to replace some in Robertson County, it's replacing a leased facility. The TCAT's been in discussion with the local government about the donation of some property adjacent to the high school to build a facility that will help them move those programs, but also increase their dual enrollment presence in Robertson County. The other project is Sumner County is in Portland. Currently, we're leasing a facility that's part of the old high school. It's the old Votech portion of the building. They have voted to donate the building to us. This would renovate that building along with adding additional space so that we could increase the programs we offer in Sumner County. The next project at Ball State and TCAT Hartsville is in Wilson County. This is a project where we would build a new facility in Wilson County. Right now, we have some property that Ball State owns in Mount Juliet, and they're looking at the additional, if needed, some additional land purchase. We're also in discussion with local government about the position of donating property that would be adjacent to their high school. So we've got a couple different options for a new facility there. The next project at TCAT Shelbyville, this is Lincoln County campus replacement. Currently, we're leasing space there for the TCAT. This would build a facility on Motlow State's campus there in Lincoln County. The project that we're adding is a statewide project for aviation. This actually includes 2 campuses. One is the TCAT Memphis facility it's on leased property at the airport. The lease expires, I believe, next year. They have approached us saying that they don't want to renew the lease. And we've been in conversations with them. The airport authority has proposed some different property that they would donate where we could build a new campus. We've evaluated those and I believe have selected the property that would work best for this program. The other is the TCAT Morristown Aviation. We're in a leased facility there. We've been in holdover on that property. The facility needs quite a bit of renovation. It really needs expansion, which would not be available. Again, we're in discussions with the airport authority, local government. They're looking at a piece of property that they would donate to us on the airport where we could build a new facility. We also have...
Dick, if you don't mind, I just want to interject here about the Memphis airport. It is where they need to non-renew us on the lease. It's not because they don't want to, but it's because FedEx actually needs the property that we're sitting on currently to expand their operation. So the airport is working with us diligently, trying to find location that is still adjacent or very close to the airport, but that would allow that expansion in Memphis that they so desperately need. So thank you.
Yeah, that's correct. And we've actually designed some preliminary Jeff and I have been working with the campuses to make sure that the building that we're proposing would fit on both of those sites. It would be able to expand those programs and relocate those programs. We also received other projects, again, that were submitted. We didn't prioritize or rate these projects because of the limit that THEC allows us to submit. Next slide, please. So this kind of gives you a briefing on the capital outlay match requirement that's required by THEC and FNA. TCATs aren't required for a match. The community colleges are. For renovation, new construction, it's 2% and 4%. If you look down the list, Ball State is their portion of this facility is the 2.2 million. They actually have that in the land that they've either purchased or a portion of that land was gifted to them. So we would meet all the requirements for the match. Next slide, please. The next is our capital maintenance target funding. This year, well, our request or our funding target is about 75 million. Last year, we brought $75 million forward. However, I believe we got 6 projects funded this year at $13 million. So again, we're bringing forward the 75 million. On the lower left, you'll see how we prioritize our projects as far as capital maintenance. When we run a formula, we look at an annual target funding for renovation capital maintenance, which is about 75 million. THEC runs a similar formula. As you can see, it's fairly close. Next slide, please. So again, we're requesting 46 projects at 75 million. We had additional projects submitted by the campuses of 26 million. That puts us over requests of a little over 100 million in capital maintenance. Next slide, please. We're also requested to submit a 5-year plan. Basically, this is just we take our capital maintenance formula, we kind of escalate that over a period of time. We look at it kind of an average on capital outlay, and again, that kind of gives us a projection of what we'd be requesting as we go forward for capital outlay and capital maintenance. Next slide, please. So our request is for an outlay of 261,500,000, maintenance of 75 million, $20,000 so our total request is going to be $336,520,000. Next slide. And that wraps up our part of the request. If I have any questions.
Okay. Looks like Regent Kastner has a question.
Yeah, yes, hey, Dick, appreciate the presentation very much. So one point of clarification I'm just curious about. My experience with airport authorities is oftentimes, when they talk about land, they're entering into medium-term or long-term leases, which I find pretty objectionable. These 2 airports that are talking about donating land, are we going to have fee simple title to that?
Yes, sir. That been our approach, is to get fee simple. And so I believe the one in Memphis, it's adjacent. It's a property they own, but it's not. It doesn't attach to the tarmac. So they can transfer that to us fee simple. The other one at Morristown, it actually is on the airport property, but what we've discussed with them, it's at the far corner of the property. We would carve that out so that they would donate that to us fee simple. We would actually have to, put security between us and them. But what the discussion is that we could have either a sally port or something so that the students could actually cross over onto the airport property. because what we've been doing up there is the instructor, if he sees a plane, because we're actually on the property and lease facility, they see an aircraft that comes in they haven't seen before, he will go over there and talk to the pilot or the owner, and the students will go over there and actually look at that. So we'll still have that opportunity. We'll actually be separated by fence, but adjacent to some hangars that they're looking at.
So we don't need to really be on the tarmac, is what you're saying, but we do need access.
Yeah, that is correct. It's nice if we are, but we don't have to be. We want to be near the airport because of obviously there's some relationships we have. We do have some facilities that are on the airport that we lease a facility. That was the project that we do have. The current project at Memphis. It was on leased land. We got funding, I guess it was 30 years ago, whatever, on leased property. So we told them our position was to have that in a fee simple position.
Yeah, I think that's what you need to do. I think it's great. M&A here in Nashville, if I go build a hangar at one of their airports, they'll give me like a 10-year land lease, and then they effectively own it all after 10 years. It's very punitive.
Yes, sir.
Like that structure at all.
And Regent Kastner, our goal is to not have to move again.
I get it. That's the right goal.
Yeah, it's a 30-year lease that has now come due. The good news is that in the lease there is some money allocated for moving us if we had to move. So that's the good news.
That's helpful.
They will help a little bit. It won't build the building, but it will be somewhat helpful anyway. But they know that our ultimate goal is that we own the land and we build a permanent structure that no one has to worry about this in 30 years.
Sure. I think that's the right approach. So, thank you.
Yes, sir. Regent George, see your hand up. Mark, I think you're muted.
Thank you. I have three questions. Do we have to be at Memphis International, or could we be at a smaller airport like DeWitt, Spain, or something like that?
We looked at that and working with the campus. I think because of the location, some of the programs, their association with Southwest, it worked better to be at the Memphis. We looked at Arlington, the possibility of that airport. They looked at Millington. So we looked at some other opportunities. They looked at some leased. A couple of those, I think, from what I looked at, the only way that they allowed us to be there, they wanted us to be there actually in a leased position. I think they were going to offer up an existing facility that could be renovated. So I think in discussing this with the campus, the best opportunity is there. I think being adjacent to the airport, like I say, there's a lot of relationships they have with the industry that's around there. There's also, I think, in that area or that part of town, I think the president is actually interested in this facility of being able to offer other programs in there too. So it kind of gets them, it spreads out their footprint on what they have to offer. And I think they may be looking at some type of either machine tool, mechatronics, something that could have some relationship to the aircraft industry, but also have the ability that it could be used for other industry.
Makes sense. So thank you for that. And then on the Vol State matching fund of 4%, and were they able to match that with land that was donated to them? Is that where the 4% came from?
Yes, sir. So it was partially donated land, and then we purchased property, but we do own the land now there in Mount Juliet.
Yep. So that would be part of the outlay for Vol State, and they would get credit for that as a 4%.
That is correct.
Okay. Then my last question was this $261 million outlay. Is that part of the $1 billion that the state has appropriated? This is in addition to the $1 billion we're spending on new campuses and new technical colleges?
Yes, sir, that's correct. So when we did the the $1 billion and looking at the master plan, our focuses at that point were on owned facilities, and whether we were relocating or areas in the current master plan where we were looking at expanding our footprint. We really didn't focus in on the lease, some of the leased facilities. I think, when we started that and in the THEC, and looking at the THEC master plan requirements, they really don't address lease facilities because those come and go. So, I mean, we have a lot of leases that may be annual, 1-year leases where we're teaching classes and that type of thing. So they don't really focus on that. I think the belief was in Memphis, nobody ever expected that they would not renew the lease after the 30 years. But since there's such a big growth and on that airport, and like the chancellor said with Southwest, they need that to expand their footprint. That's actually adjacent. It's right on the airport tarmac.
Okay, I don't have any more questions, Committee Chair White.
All right. Any other questions before we call for a motion here? Okay, is there a motion to approve the recommendations as presented?
I'll make the motion.
Thank you, Mark. Is there a second?
Yeah, I'll second.
All right, thank you, Todd. Any discussion? So this does require a roll call vote, and Mariah, I'll ask you to call the roll, please.
Regent George.
Aye.
Regent Gill.
Aye.
Regent Kastner.
Aye.
Regent White.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Great, thank you. So this completes our agenda for today, and unless there's any other business to come before our committee, I will declare the committee meeting adjourned. Thank you all.
Well done. We are almost back on track time-wise, so lots of good work there in the Finance Committee. It is 11:05 and time for audit. Regent Burdine, are you ready?
Yes, ma'am.
Let's go.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Good morning or good afternoon, depending where you are in this wonderful state of Tennessee. As Chair of the Audit Committee, I'm calling the Audit Committee meeting to order. Madam Secretary, will you please call the roll?
Yes. Since this is an electronic meeting, there are 2 questions that need to be answered by regents for the record. First, can the regent simultaneously hear and speak with others participating in the meeting? And second, is the regent alone in the room? If the answer to both questions is yes, the regent can simply answer yes to both questions. Anyone who is not alone should identify any other people present in the room with the regent. When I call your name, please answer these 2 questions, and we'll start with our audit committee members, and we'll check then for other board members who may have joined or are remaining on the line. Regent Apple. Chairman Burdine.
Yes to both questions.
Regent Kastner.
Yes to both questions.
And Regent White.
Yes to both.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, we have a quorum. I'll now check for other board members. Governor Lee, Regent Garten, Regent Gentile, Regent George,
Yes to both questions.
Regent Gill,
Yes to both questions.
Commissioner Hatcher, Regent Hooper, Regent Pilkington,
Here and yes to both.
Regent Powers,
Here and yes to both.
Madam Chair Emily Reynolds, Commissioner Reynolds, Regent Roberts,
I'm here, and my 8-year-old daughter is just running around in the background.
thank you, Regent Stevenson, Regent Spurgeon, Regent Varlin, and coming back, Madam Chair Emily Reynolds, are you with us or did you step away? Okay,
I'm here. I'm so sorry. I'm here. And yes to both.
thank you, ma'am. Mr. Chair, we are clear to proceed. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Chair
ma'am.
Reynolds, I just assumed you were having a hard time counting to 2.
That would be a correct assumption. Oh.
This meeting is being held electronically as it is the most economically efficient way, and the matters to be considered require timely action and review by the audit committee. Given that the necessity to meet electronically is a non-controversial and routine item, I propose that the necessity be adopted by unanimous consent. Anyone who wants to have individual votes on the necessity to meet electronically should feel free to object, in which case we'll have a roll call vote. If there's no objection, then necessity, I can't say a word today, necessity to meet electronically is adopted. Is there any objection? Hearing none, the necessity is adopted. We'll go quickly into informational reporting with Chief Audit Officer Mike Batson. Mike?
Thank you, Chair Burdine, and thank you, Audit Committee members and other regents. We'll get started with highlights, first recommendations, and findings. Chattanooga State and Jackson, we have a couple of different recommendations that have been closed. There should be more than that. There are two from Southwest that should be marked as closed, but I apologize, I missed those in preparing the materials. But those are showing as in progress for Southwest and should be closed out. For Rome State, there's a couple of recommendations that are a little older related to accounts receivable. Received an update from Cynthia yesterday, and they're making progress on those and hope to have an updated status on those in the next couple of weeks. Let's see, several TCAP recommendations have been cleared. I think once these are cleared, this is probably the fewest number of open recommendations we've had in quite some time. So again, making good progress on those as we go forward. Next slide, please. Miscellaneous reviews. There were 4 this time around. First, Chattanooga State had requested that the National Association of Student Financial Aid Administrators perform a standard of excellence review. We've seen those before for other colleges. It's really sort of the best practices thing. A group of financial aid administrators comes in and does the review to help see where they are in terms of compliance and best practices. In this case, the report noted several strengths for Chattanooga State overall and with student services. They also identified 23 compliance exceptions. None of those are overly serious. Most are pretty easy to correct. Those were areas of disclosure of student consumer information. There were several related to consumer information disclosures, which are easy for the college to correct. Outdated net price calculator. We had actually talked to their financial aid director a month or so ago about that, and they were in the process of correcting those. The report also provided 32 recommendations in terms of sort of best practice, enhancing efficiencies, not necessarily anything wrong. Those related to establishing a consumer information team to periodically review their consumer information disclosures, tracking and monitoring federal work study expenditures so that they could use those funds more effectively. Also documenting cost of attendance calculations, cross-training staff within the financial aid office. So several, again, best practice recommendations that came from the report. And the national reports are always very helpful to our campuses in terms of compliance. Next up, a couple of THEC VA reviews. Both Roane State and Vol State had reviews. Neither one had findings. I think Roane had 2 minor issues noted, and Vol State had 1 minor issue noted, and those were corrected immediately. So congratulations to those 2 for those. Next up, TCAT Nashville had a TSAC financial aid program review. 2 warnings and 4 findings in the report. Those, again, not terribly concerning. The TCAT was able to correct those. They provided a response to TSAC. They only had $845 in terms of liability noted. That issue was addressed, and TSAC accepted the TCAT's response report on that. Next step in highlights federal audits. Again, a few of those this time. First, we had 2 VA audits, compliance surveys for Columbia State and Vol State. Again, no discrepancies were noted there. And we're seeing a lot more VA reviews. And if you recall, this is why we had sort of internal audits done about a year and a half or so ago on our VA compliance. I think those have been helpful with our colleges going forward here. So again, congratulations to Columbia and Ball State for no findings on those. Next up, Roane State had a Department of Labor Workforce Opportunities for Rural Communities grant monitoring review. There was one finding related to low grant expenditures. That was due to, during COVID, a slow startup for Roane State on that grant. They provided a corrective action plan as well as a plan for their expenditures going forward for the last portion of that grant that was accepted by the Department of Labor. They had a good plan to address the low expenditure issue, again, related to slow startup during COVID and getting personnel in there. So we think they should be good on that review. Next slide, please. Internal audits, quite a few of those. I'll kind of hit the highlights here. First, Cleveland State had a NACHA, that's National Association of National Automated Clearinghouse Association security review in terms of credit card processing and that kind of thing. That's sort of a routine review. Cleveland had no findings, no recommendations there. Next up, TCAT Athens, another internal audit VA review. TCAT Athens looked good, no recommendations for that audit. Pellissippi, we had a faculty credentials audit, which Pellissippi does annually. No recommendations, no findings for that one. Next up, Cleveland State, as required, did a follow-up to their state audit findings for fiscal year 21-22. They had one finding related to the timely processing for bank reconciliations, and the report noted that they had not taken adequate corrective actions. Cleveland has had quite a bit of turnover. That was one major impact there for them getting caught up on the reconciliations. So we've recommended further actions there. TBR, Vice Chair Fox and her area worked with Cleveland to put a dual services agreement in place with one of the other colleges to provide assistance to Cleveland to get up to date on those reconciliations. That should help quite a bit, and they're in the process or have hired additional staff. Don't know if that will be a repeat finding. It really depends on how quickly they can get caught up and get everything reconciled. So unfortunately that's one that is still outstanding. Next up, Southwest had a follow-up to their federal work study program. This was centered on the Whitehaven campus. As many of you know, Southwest has had problems with work study and audits that we've done, as well as the comptroller's office for several years. This one's a little bit of good news. They have implemented the corrective actions that were recommended a little over a year ago. So hopefully they're on the right track with their work study program there and getting that squared away. Next up was TCAT Crossville. We had a cosmetology complaint investigation. This is similar to others that we have seen where allegation that funds were missing or that staff were funneling funds off from the user fees. We did not find that that was the case, could not find proof that that had happened. We did have a few recommendations for better internal controls, including pre-numbered receipt book, ensuring that there's reconciliations going on, sign-ins, and documentation of services provided. So hopefully we're able to help them make the program a little bit better, but again, did not find evidence of the allegation there. That really covers my highlights for the audit reports and reviews. If there are no questions on any other reports or any that I didn't touch on, I'll move ahead. But if there are any questions, I'd be glad to answer those. Okay, next up, system-wide internal audit updates. This, I'm probably not going to exactly follow your screen here. The internal audit director positions still have quite a few openings, including now Cleveland State. Denise Calais retired effective May 17th. So unfortunately, we have another opening there. Hopefully we can get that taken care of. We're going to work with them for getting a replacement in for Denise. Fortunately for, I think, 3 of our campuses, we have some good applicants right now. We're in the process of moving along with those. So finally, we're getting some movement at some of the other campuses. Angie Brown is still at Dyersburg, part-time temporary. I think I've mentioned before that she had retired from Jackson State a couple of years ago and was willing to come back and help out at Dyersburg on a part-time basis. And that's been a big help. So again, we'll have a little more news a little later on our openings. If you could move the slide ahead a little more. We had talked before about the TBR campus internal auditor salary study. That has been completed. I think it was in the materials for the compensation committee this morning. Just a little more background. What we had found, we started a couple of years ago looking at the job descriptions for the different campuses. We had some variances there in kind of where we were and where we needed to be on those. And then as the openings started happening and we weren't really getting any applicants for any of the positions, worked with April Preston, and we used Performance Point to come in and do a salary study for the auditor positions at the campuses alone. That was not meant to be something to sort of take them out of the campus salary studies. We wanted to keep them within the campus salary plan, but to make sure that we had an accurate assessment of the grading of where those auditors are on the campus. So that has been finished. That will be implemented in conjunction with the regular campus salary plans. It was a little surprising, but there's some significant recommendations from it, but I think it was a good process. And as part of that process, the consultants used data from the LGIs, other colleges around the state, the comptroller's office, as well as data from the Economic Research Institute and Comp Analyst, as well as the Association of College University Auditors, to kind of give us a very accurate picture of where those salary grades should be. So hopefully that's going to help both our current auditors going forward, but also to help, once it's implemented, make it a little easier to find applicants and hire good people for those positions. Again, our current openings are at Columbia, Cleveland, Dyersburg, Jackson, Motlow, and Southwest. As I mentioned, we've got some good applicants in the queue right now. So hopefully we'll make some movement there. We're working with those campuses to cover their audit needs as much as we can. Jackie's been working hard on doing HERF audits for those with vacancies. So we're trying to keep them up to speed with the vacancies that we have. And next up in our updates on management risk assessment, we talked about that at the last meeting. It's going to be essentially the same process with some minor revisions to make it a little bit better. We're trying to get it better every year. That will be presented at the August meeting. They're due to us by the end of this month for us to review. We've gotten quite a few of those in. I'm pleased with what we've gotten in so far. It will also include the risk mitigation inventory that we've talked about and started a couple of years ago. So again, making good progress there. And hopefully it's got to be both a more meaningful process for the colleges as well as an easier process. One other update, just we had internal audit or training back in April to provide some continuing education hours. Just sort of a preview, the Institute of Internal Auditor standards are changing effective next year. So we provided a little bit of training on those. That will be very significant for us going forward. So we kind of provide a preview of that for the auditors. Those will have to be implemented effective essentially in January of 25, but extensive changes to the standards. And we're trying to make sure that everybody is up to date on those. That concludes my system-wide updates. We'll move along to the universities and their comptrollers audits. As you've heard me say before, the comptrollers audits for the LGIs are presented due to the board's continued bond finance responsibilities related to the LGIs. We had 3 audit reports that had no findings: MTSU, Tennessee Tech, and then the TSU Foundation for fiscal year 22 for the foundation had no findings. Next, we had several with findings: Austin P, ETSU, and TSU. Each had findings, as well as University of Memphis had 1 finding. Those summaries are in your materials. In interest of time, I won't really go into details there. We do not see anything that will really impact bond financing activities or capabilities for those universities. But if you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer those on any of those audit reports. Seeing none.
Yeah, I guess
Yes,
I got one quick question. When we say no impact on bond financings, are we saying that retrospectively or prospectively? In other words,
good question.
In other words, is
prospectively.
Okay, so it's a fact. We're saying that looking forward, we don't see that their issues would preclude new bond financings. Is that what we're saying?
I think so. I mean, just based on the limited information we have, you would have to take it as a whole. And, the finance and accounting area reviews that information, reviews their budget information as it comes in, but taken as these audit reports, even though I hate to call it TSU, but I think they had 9 findings and several repeat findings, which are a concern. But I think they're in a financially good footing going forward. They just have a lot of internal control problems. Now that could devolve for any college to get worse. But yes, sir, going forward, what we're seeing in their numbers, just based on these reports, does not give concern. Now, you always have concerns with the findings, but in terms of the bond finance piece, they seem to be in good standing there and able to support that going forward. Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Chair Burdine, that completes my informational report.
Thank you, Micah. Any other questions about the information reports? All right, let's move on to review of revisions of fiscal year 2024 audit plans. Mike?
Thank you, Regent Burdine. Several updates and revisions to the audit plans. Due to the vacancies we have at several of the colleges, there are no plans for those for Columbia, Jackson, Motlow, and Southwest. We did have one for Cleveland before Denise had retired. We've added Dyersburg with Angie Brown there. She's included some audits, so that has been added. We have sort of 15 new items and 7 items that have been removed. These are all fairly routine. As we've talked about before, we will remove planned items if an investigation or something unplanned or a request from the president comes up. There's nothing here that gives me concern. Again, fairly routine items that are part of the internal audit process, that plans change and we have to switch our priorities as they come in. So that completes my report on the revisions for the 24 audit plans, Regent Burdine.
Thank you, sir. Any questions? This does require a roll call vote, so I need a motion.
So moved, Tom.
Thank you, sir. And a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Any questions, any discussion? Ryan?
Chairman Burdine,
Aye.
Regent Kastner,
Aye.
and Regent White.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Back to you, Mike, for internal audit charters.
Thank you, Regent Burdine. This will be a very short one. We have a new internal audit charter with Angie Brown taking over on an interim basis at Dyersburg. They implemented a new charter. There are no changes to the content of the charter, just Dr. Cook and Angie Brown have signed it, so that's the only update to that. Again, no substantive changes to the charter itself. And that concludes my report on charters. Chair Burdine.
Thank you, Mike. This does require a roll call vote, so can I get a motion?
So moved.
Yeah, I'll second this one, Tom.
Tom gave a second. Any discussion? Madam Secretary, back to you.
Chairman Burdine,
Aye.
Regent Kastner,
Aye.
Regent White.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Mike, you're up again.
Thank you, sir. Next up is the approval of our office's budget for the fiscal year 25 year. Not much in the way of change here. We did request a little additional travel money just based on the vacancies that we have. It's going to require a little more travel from our office to make sure we keep good coverage there. We did request more as a formality, and we understand the current budget situation, but just to kind of keep it on record, an additional information systems auditor. Again, just that we want to kind of keep that on the radar, that's one thing that we're looking for in the future. But our budget really covers our needs. We couldn't really ask for more. So I would recommend this for your approval, Regent Burdine.
Thank you, sir. This is another roll call vote, so can I get a motion for approval?
So moved, Tom.
Thank you, Tom. Second?
Second.
Thank you, Todd. Madam Secretary.
Chairman Burdine,
Aye.
Regent Kastner,
Aye.
Regent White.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you, ma'am. This does conclude the agenda for the public session. So unless anyone has any further business to come before the committee, anybody got anything else? Okay, public session stands adjourned. Thank you, everyone, for your time. Those of you who are supposed to be on the executive session should have the information, so I'll see you here in just a minute. Thank you.